There we go. Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 34th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today, I'm going to be continuing our part 2 of the origins of High Point, but instead of just kind of going on the ramble and rant like I did last time and trying to keep coherent with the full story, I actually have Kage calling in today, and he's remoting in, and he has a couple questions. He got to watch the stream, and he's going to have a couple questions, interview me a little bit on the origins of High Point, and we're going to go into a few more details about what we discussed last week, and then hopefully that will lead us into some more discussion. So let me go ahead and bring him in, and we will get everything set up for this discussion. That is the wrong camera. Hang on. There we go. How is it going, Kage? Let me unmute you on my end. Perfect. There we go.
Shalom, my friends and neighbors. It is good to be here. Long distance, but it's all good. I'm very excited. I watched the first High Point Origins stream, and I was very excited. It was one of my favorites. So I have some notes here. I gotta make sure my freaking face stays in camera. All right. But yeah, I have some notes here. I have some thoughts. I have some questions. But yeah, I am excited. It's gonna be pretty cool.
Yeah, very nice. Just answering Cosmic in chat there. All right, nice to see you, Cosmic. Thank you so much for being here on time as always. In fact, early.
Right.
We were actually, I think, a minute late getting that countdown going.
Cosmic's always keeping us on time. That's for sure.
But yeah, I'm actually really, really excited about this episode, about this stream. It was a lot of fun for me to go over the origins of High Point, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to go in terms of how I wanted to describe it and all the talking points I wanted to hit. But in the end, I was very happy with how I did it. I think I stuck pretty well to most of the timeline in a chronological order and only dipped off when I felt like I needed to. But I think it kind of was a good overarching thing, overarching story without really going into a lot of like the nitty gritty that, I try to stay away from things I wanted people to be. I mean, well, it's not like my viewers are going to be gamers, but there are some things that are meant to kind of be learned in game.
You never know.
Yeah. But yeah, there's some things that are meant to be learned in game. And then there are other things that are fascinating to talk about, like the creation of the Saints and everything. Like I do want to do a whole series of that, but it wasn't specifically crucial to the origins of High Point, as those were a byproduct of the story that I told about High Point. But it was also really fun because that was really the first time I got to really talk about the origins beyond when I started DMing in High Point. That was like the first time I really got to talk about the pre-origins of
the seed.
Basically having been in a different world and having been in a different realm, and then coming from that. That's just something that I haven't really spoken a lot about, just because I don't, you know me, I don't tend to speak, even for like Wizards of the Coast or anything else like that, I don't tend to speak on other people's behalf. Right. It's just not something I find very respectful, so I try to stick with what I know and what I find to be mine, and even call out when I'm not even 100% sure if it's mine or if it's recognizably an influenced idea. But I digress. There's a lot of details I wanted to go into, but I really wanted to stick with those major benchmarks of what led to, again, following the path of what led me to wanting to be a DM and what led Zenith to High Point. What is High Point? Kind of describing like the idea of, what is it outside of just being a realm or a setting essentially. And then, we can also, cut that to, or bring that down to level 2. We say realm, right? Like that's just a common word that I like to use. It's a word that I typically picked up.
That's what I'm used to now.
Yeah, and it's a word that I picked up from my DM and my previous gaming group, where that was just what they used. But you call it realm, you call it setting, you call it world, you call it whatever you want, your universe. You can even call it your crystal sphere. Like again, it's all of those interchangeable concepts of what do you consider the terminology behind it. I like calling it realm because it's more than just the setting that my gamers go through, because through the story it is Zenith's like area. It is what he rules. He is the god of this place. So realm also, I think, sets the tone of the type of place it is. You know, it's magic, it has religion, it has, you know, god tier people, it has low, you know, mortals. So I think it's just more of a, I like to use words to really like infer things and get, you know, to inspire things. So I think the term realm also inspires a lot more. It also helps inspire the idea of being in that archaic setting and not like a technological setting, because that's another thing, you know, you think realm, kingdom, you know, old school.
Right.
And then Cosmic asked, did we see the comment on the YouTube version of the previous D&D stream? I did not. I did not get a notification.
Oh no, we gotta see this.
Let me check it out real quick. But yeah, so I was really happy with new comment. Yeah, there is a new comment. I was really happy with how it went, and I'm really interested and excited to hear what kind of questions that we can go over and what details you're interested in. But let me go here. I rarely check YouTube because it's not up to speed yet. So wow, we actually have 2 brand new comments. Okay, so there's one comment from Kage, which is from 6 hours ago. The wibbly wobbly timey-wimey totally makes sense.
It makes sense.
Totally. And then we have one. Okay, so we have another comment here. So this was for weather matters. So this was the last one that you were here for. We did the homebrew spells from your kids, or from your gamers. And we also talked about the utilization of weather. So we have the comment here is, so by the time... so by the time we looked at Bolero's backstory, Cosmic ended up going out for food and took a walk. Oh, that's why we couldn't hear from Cosmic the entire time. So that's unfortunate. So
we get to watch it, Cosmic. That's fire.
He does want to know. He does want us to let us know that the best fact that Bolero is hunting down the lumberjacks based on a false memory. So that's the best fact about it, is he's doing all of this based on a false memory. So we didn't actually know that. So we were thinking of it all as, as that's exactly how like the normal heroic story goes. So as stated, his firebolt spell is what killed the Dryad friend. The lumberjacks are technically innocent of that, of that specific outcome, which he did infer. That was absolutely inferred. I assumed it in the background that he had technically been the cause of the Dryad's death, but I was still down with the story that he blamed the lumberjacks for the whole situation, because I think that is part of the verbiage that was in there, was that he said he blamed them for starting the whole thing, or basically leading to this situation. Right. But it is a good point to make that he is blaming them for the death that technically he caused. So it is that almost origin story of an evil character, kind of.
Well,
and then he also says that Bolero's been hunting them down based on a false memory caused by a 20 plus years of a searching and falling unconscious in the moment. So, caused by the 20 plus years of search and falling unconscious at the moment. So it's intended that when he tries to get his revenge, the lumberjack tries to correct him, only for it to lead to a personal conflict, trying to realize what had actually happened, and coming to terms with the fact that he is the one at fault, not the lumberjack. So it's a coming up to terms story where it's going to come to a head with the lumberjack, and if he has a chance to talk and actually has that conversation with him, there's going to be a chance.
I mean, is he going to be a barbarian just going to rage and go crazy on the man?
I know, right? Like, if you get a chance to talk.
Exactly. Okay. So, do you want me to start with my first question? Because I'm kind of excited about my first question. Because, this is just more of a what do you think?
Oh yeah, he's a wizard bard, so he can't technically rage, but it will be interesting to see how his reaction is. So I don't know. You know what? I this is your interview. Consider this your interview on this platform.
All right.
The Origins of High Point. If you haven't seen it, go check it out on YouTube. Misfit Gamer Studios. It was 2 streams ago, so it was the Origins of High D&D discussions, Origins of High Point. You can go check that out. But yeah, man, just let's go, man. Let's talk about it, and whatever you know. I don't know if you want to go in chronological order or whatnot, but
before we even get into
you got questions.
the
Let's go.
Story itself, I want to know, what did you think that my favorite part was going to be?
All right, Cosmic.
I'm just
Cosmic, this is your doing. This is the kind of you gave him this question. Okay.
I like this
So
question,
what do
all
I
right?
think your favorite part out of all of it?
Like, because like, here's the deal. I've been one of your players for a while, right? Like, I know some of this, but like, clearly there were aspects that I found out that I didn't know before.
I think the anomaly. I would say the anomaly is if I had to pick one thing that I discussed about the Origins of High Point that I think is, I don't know if it's your favorite, because it's so hard because I honestly don't remember how detailed I got with a lot of things.
Yeah.
So what your favorite part was, I think would be probably more related to well, again, I don't know. There's like multiple levels, because there's the level of talking about going to phase and dealing with his buddy there, because that directly relates to your gameplay. There's the fact that you're always interested in my history of gaming, so me talking about what led up to me trying to make my own world and actually how I got away. Hey, Wally, how's it going? Nice to see you. I'm glad you're here. So it could have been... Personally, it could have been from the gamer side of you, the player side, where it was talking about what directly relates to your character. It could have been you just wanting to know more about what happened before I created High Point. But I think in terms of what piques your interest, or what I think would, like, just in general be like the highlight, would be the anomaly in general. And the origin of the anomaly, and how it pertains to everything.
Here's the deal. That is also what I thought.
So I nailed it? Like, that's basically, did I guess correctly?
Not really, because the true answer surprised even
I got it
me.
wrong.
True answer surprised even me. That's what the crazy part is. So when I was first listening to you go through all of this, and I was listening to it, like, kind of like while I was doing some other stuff, I was absorbing the information, I was stopping, I was writing down my notes in between, but there was a certain point where I found myself just no longer doing any of the things that I was doing, and I was just fucking like, what the fuck? Like, what the fuck? And I was just going, and it was when you started talking about what actually happening with the Saints. Okay, when you started going into, what was that? Was that the War of the Fallen?
The first war, the first Great War.
The second Great War. The first one was the creation and power.
You're talking about when we talked about the Great Wars.
Yes, it was the second.
The War of the Fallen with the second war.
Correct.
Gotcha.
The Second Great War, when you started going into detail as to like what caused it, and you started talking about how you had this, like, these first creations were these saints, and that they were like the true independent entities from himself that he created with the abilities to like live and breathe and do things, and like how these entities
keep going.
Just how these entities now had an opportunity to affect what he was trying to create. And so much so that his goal wasn't to just destroy them like he had destroyed so many other items, so that their energy can go redispersed and recreated and recrafted. It was, you now have your own autonomy from me to make choices and do different things. And even if what you choose isn't what I would want you to choose, you still have the ability to choose it.
Mm-hmm.
And now the whole story of of how, and this is what really got, because the mindset of like a god being like omnipotent and being able to not necessarily like see the future, but see the future, and like be able to be like, hey, I know this is what's gonna have to go down, and I know that as a result of this, that I'm gonna have to knock this domino down, and that domino's gonna knock that one down, and that one's gonna, and then go throughout the whole thing, and like we might have to start gaming again soon because
well, and you're right in the
I've
thick
got
of a
some
lot of
stuff
that, so
to
you're
go.
actually close to being able to know a lot more about that. Because I don't think we had this conversation on stream when we really, you and I discussed mantles.
Correct.
That was off stream, right?
Did bring it up on stream. We talked about mantles on stream shortly after that, but we did have a long conversation.
Okay, because yeah, because when we came to talking about like the mantles, because we've talked about like what I consider like the Eternals, like, you know, the mantles that are and will always be, because things like the ones that basically are so powerful that they just are. So we're talking about things like you know, death, dream, those, you know, those kind of like concepts that they exist and permeate throughout all existence, which again ties back into the idea of, you know, someone like you know, Mystara and Mistral and a lot of those other you know, high named you know, more famous, like from the D&D lore. The reason why that was, you know, kind of that concept of layering, because again, they permeate all existence. So that is why the death of the weave was a lot more damaging and a lot more of a situation. Even, you know, even those Eternals have you know, look at that as a problem, right? Like, even if they are always going to be eternal, that's still kind of a problem. But yeah, so when it came to, you know, especially with the War of the Fallen, that was a really big turning point in how I changed the world and how I wanted to reorganize how and what I was doing with gaming and DMing. But it also meant that, because, you know, we all have that thing where you start to make a story, and sometimes, not, I don't want to say that you have to retcon things, but you have to really realize that one thing that you had going really doesn't fit where you thought it was, but if you tweak it, it fits a lot better.
100%.
And that's kind of
100%.
one of that thing where I had so much work done to this that I didn't really want to scrap anything, but you know me, I don't like shoehorning, and I don't like doing the whole, well, just because I'm DM, so I just say it. So I had to think really hard and clear about what I wanted to retcon, like what was safe to retcon in terms of what wouldn't undo the big storylines, and what really wouldn't undo the integrity of what I had kept going. But at the same time, I also didn't want to just say, oh, that character or that, you know, a particular, you know, NPC that I've been developing this whole time, I don't want them to just suddenly change on a dime for no reason. And I don't want to just say, oh, well, you know, they had a change of heart. So
They're just
that's
magically different now.
Right. And one of my favorite examples, and we can't do this song particularly because that's the only downside about like why music is so important in my realm, is when we talk about it. Unfortunately, if I ever do the podcast again, there's going to be some content we just have to cut out of the podcast because it will involve a copyrighted song. And we just won't be able to do it.
Credit or something.
No, you'd have to buy the license for it, and we won't be that popular. But I digress.
That's
One
fair.
of my favorite songs on the playlist that are the Realm. I have a playlist that is Realm approved, in terms of all the songs that are actively known in the Realm and are assigned to a person. One of those in particular is not only related to one of the saints, it's one of the saints songs, but it's also directly related to essentially the instigation of the War of the Fallen. Like, the song directly is essentially the cinematic moment. Is like, if you were to go back in time and see this happen, when I talked about how Zenith had to basically make changes, but some people weren't going to be convinced, so he had to make them choose it. He had to basically manipulate to do the right thing, or to do to do what he needed to do. So in one situation, one particular saint that he had, that a lot of them trusted, one of the more favorited saints and one of the more highly respected ones, when they had finally like accepted his offer, not really his offer, but essentially he gave them all choices. And of course, he knew which choices he wanted everyone to make. And he knew some of them wouldn't make that choice. Well, so he essentially he knew how to get several of them to make that choice all at once. And that was by making one of them take a different choice. Like, all he had to do was make one of them make a choice, and he knew the domino effect. So what ended up happening was he went in that direction, got one of them to make the choice that he wanted them to make, or essentially the choice he knew was going to happen, but put it in the present tense. Here, choose it. But here's the problem. By doing so, he hid the amount of knowledge he knew about the situation. So, of course, it was their choice, but it was not fully informed.
I can see it playing out right now. It's so crazy.
And when that moment happened, when that NPC, when that saint made the choice, this might have to be a different... I don't know how much I want to go into right now because I want to get to other questions, but when that moment happened, a realization happened among all of the saints. It was finally the realization that the choices aren't what we thought, and some understood, and some saw it as a outright betrayal. And because of that betrayal, especially because a lot of them felt like the favorited and the most loved had just gotten betrayed, and for all intents and purposes, basically by making that choice and the betrayal led to that one no longer existing, which is why they all felt betrayed.
Weird question.
Yeah.
The favorite, the one that made the choice, the one that accepted happily, everybody else was surprised when they realized that them accepting this basically meant that they would no longer exist.
Correct. That was the misinformation part.
Was the person that made the choice, did they know?
Nobody knows that, for sure. Technically, Zenith is the only one who could know that. But according to everybody else, that information was not available. So, when that choice was made, the moment... Basically what happened is they made their choice, and from everybody else's point of view, they ceased to exist.
So I'm not gonna lie, one of my in-game goals now is to logically have Dov to ask Zenith that question.
Do it. But
he's got to know all this stuff like in game, but
you're closer than you think. But in that moment, so once the favorite ceased to exist, a literal 1 second later is when the song would start. The song comes into creation, and that song is both another Saints song. It's like the Saints song, but it basically most of the time the songs are usually gifted or created on a god tier, or if you're good enough you don't necessarily have to create your own song in game unless you're like a bard, but the idea is that songs are kind of a representation of your aura musically. So if you're powerful enough or important enough, you can either generate one or have one gifted to you, because someone can tell create your aura. So it's a power, right? It's an essence of your power. And some songs are more significant of a moment, and they feed a moment. Others can be essentially called upon, and kind of like a power up. They can either give the individual or others boosts. So songs have a lot of power and play. That's why it's kind of sucks that we have copyright issues. But yeah, so Saint number 1 takes the deal. 1 second later, Saint number 2, because of the wave of realization, snaps, kind of. And basically Zenith had another offer, but knew that one would never take it. The moment this happened, they took it not really took it as in knew they were going to say no and now said yes. It was this situation happening made all of it fall into place to where they accepted. Basically, it was all about accepting mantles. I should just say that. I should have said that earlier to do that. So basically, the choices were accepting mantles. They understood that they were saints, but he needed positions to be filled. So he was offering mantles, and when one took one mantle and realized what had happened, basically that mantle made them cease to exist. At that exact moment, the mantle that the other needed took over. And that's when the song happened, because the song is essentially the power overload of the mantle taking over, because the saint that it took over was one of the more powerful of all of the saints. So that song birthed into the moment when he essentially lost it. And
so when he snapped, essentially, he basically changed his aura so much that he embodied this mantle, whether he I don't want to say whether he wanted to or not, but like
he changed so much. Like it was so devastating of a moment. The moment was so devastating that it changed and fractured him so much that it gave the mantle the placehold it needed. Like it basically turned him into the vessel. So imagine, kind of like if you remember how in Supernatural, how they wanted to do, Lucifer and Michael had to do their possessions of the boys, but they needed permission. But remember how Lucifer did it to get the first body? He just had to go find the person who was weak, talk them into it, and then once they were ready, that they would be able to accept it. Kind of the same thing, except the mantle didn't have to ask. It just needed the vessel, and in that moment, it was kind of I'm not only broken, but now I'm calling for help, calling for power. It's just an all-around situation where you're now my vessel. And Zenith knew this. Zenith always knew that he didn't know that this is what was going to happen, but he always knew that these series of events were going to lead what needed to happen for High Point to birth the correct way. Again, it's not like this was written in some stone. It's not like he had some clairvoyance that this is going to happen, but looking at the situation and looking at the future of High Point, he knew that certain people needed to be in certain places, and he worked with what he had.
Yeah.
So that'll be a fun conversation. Well, I want to have that conversation with you off stream first. Well, actually, I want to talk to you about that song and what that saint is and everything. But I want to talk to you off stream first so we can discuss how better to have these discussions on stream regarding the copyrighted content, because we can't play the song. So I don't want to get too far deep into
have I heard the song?
Yeah, absolutely.
You showed it to me yet?
Oh, yeah. But yeah, I want to discuss how we can bring those conversations onto stream. Like maybe we just have to sit here with the lyrics and just go over each lyric and what it means, and then other people can go listen to the song and have the visual in their head. But that will be a whole stream right there, just going over a song or two, because that's a lot of lyrics. And I don't just choose songs because they sound good. It's like, I will even say I creep myself out sometimes, because I will choose a song for a person or a thing. And the more I listen, the weirder it gets, because the better it makes the situation, and the more every like line basically matters. So yeah, when we go over that, I'm really interested to see if we can come up with something. But yeah, so you were. I'm interested. Yeah, I thought you would be most interested in other things, like the fracturing and all of that. But no, you were most interested
that was great. But those saints, man. When I saw like the creation, like again, with a lot of Cosmic's lore, when you really peel behind the veil and you see the content, like the rich content that's in the world, like it makes you want to go touch it. Like it really does. So, it's very cool. It's very cool.
Well, and that's the fun thing is, like, I want to talk about all that stuff, and it's like, for so long I've kept it hidden, because I've always thought, like, well, if I talk to you guys about it, then you guys know about it, but it's more interesting if you meet these NPCs, if you're going to meet these gods, and then you learn about them, and then you find out in-game why they are the way they are. But you know how long that takes, right? And it's like, right now, I'm not in a position to make this available to a lot of people outside of this stream. So really, it's like, I could hope that one day you and Vixie game to that point. But at the same time, is it really worth having all of this stuff that I'm excited to talk about, and I know that you guys would be interested in? Is it worth me not talking about it? And that's another whole different topic for a whole other day that we should talk about
for sure.
is how to properly metagame your world, or how much you should metagame your storyline. Because there's one thing where you don't want to metagame to give too much of an advantage, but the reason why I consider metagaming gaming, like I consider this conversation right here about the High Point history, since you're one of my players, this is gaming to me. It doesn't have to be in world. It just anything related to your improvement and your enrichment as a player is gaming, right? And I've always struggled with, coming from a more traditional gaming party where everybody was very secretive because it was all about, individual agendas and plot hooks. And that was great for the gaming process. But I don't have that enrichment. I don't have that many players. I don't have that much of an enriching environment. And we don't play that often to benefit from that level of gameplay as much. Which is why, you guys, I always give you the choice how much you want to choose to give about your player or about your character to each other. And you guys are usually pretty open about like a lot of the stuff. There's just a few things that you guys like to keep kind of like, on the down low for yourselves. But me as a DM, I have so much going on in High Point that unless we really speed through a lot of stuff and we start gaming differently than we normally do, which is kind of like jumping you from one benchmark to the next, yeah, it's like, really, I'm kind of doing myself and you guys a disservice by not talking about a lot of that fun background stuff. Even though it may benefit you or give you some insights in the game, it would be more fun, and I still think it would be, like you just said, just talking about it got you interested in gaming again. So maybe this is what I need to do to get us all kind of like on the gaming level, is do more metagaming like this. And I would love to do that, especially for Thursdays. If you can keep the ideas coming, maybe I'll just keep talking about High Point the next couple Thursdays and just go into all of the details of not just about, like specific. I mean, I can talk about the specific locations. I can show off the map, but I can also just talk about more about these layers. So
yes,
cool. All right. Well, fascinating. Okay. Yeah, I'm fascinated that you're so interested in the Saints. Maybe that will be a big topic for. I really I enjoy the Saints. The Saints were a fun bunch of NPCs to create.
So my next question is: so there was, just as a DM, I know that I have definitely had to make adjustments, in my world and what I've created, We'll just say this: I went way too big, way too fast.
It happens.
In general, I was like, well, let's try and find literally anything you guys would be interested in, you want to interact with, whatever, And it was a lot. I tried to, like you, give everyone everything that they wanted, rule of cool, all this, that, and the third. But, so my question is, how much of the changes that you made in history, how much of those significant turning points occurred specifically due to player character issues, or at least it was a large part of player character issues and being maybe the catalyst or the turning point.
So I would say that. So you're talking about in terms of the origin, the origin story, the lore, how many of those benchmarks directly relate to, or you just mean how many things that I changed because I thought they would be better, and how many things changed because they needed to improve for actual gameplay?
Kind of, yeah. It's a lot of the stuff that you were talking about that you inevitably changed, especially in the first area, the first section where it was the phase of creation and then the lore of power, right?
Right.
That whole mentality, when I look at that, when I think about that, I'm like, okay, like you said, there was a lot of power out there. A lot of people could do a lot of things, You're talking about people throwing stuff and creating, their own mini solar systems in this much larger galaxy that we have here, you know? And so now there's all kinds of new creative stuff over here coalescing, Now, again, I'm not necessarily saying, well, I guess that is kind of part of my question, is were the players responsible for a lot of this flinging and throwing and
Gotcha.
flexing of their
So,
powers? You
okay.
know, this
So the
more
players never got to that level. So I never got players to that early on to that high of a stature in my realm. But in a sense, they were directly related to it because the few games that I was running back then, I was allowing too much player agency. I was allowing them to essentially get exactly what they wanted. And we would improvise a lot, essentially homebrew pretty much anything in the moment, right? Which led to me trying to take what they were doing and then try to think of how can I expand that into making the world better, which, you know, by proxy, one step after another led to decisions on my part, again, allowing just the idea of anything. So it's more of the way that I was DMing and basically very loosely DMing, basically focusing more on the story I was telling, loosely keeping track of the mechanics and kind of letting players, again, not thinking about balance in terms of what I was throwing at the players and what they were doing. I was trying to be more entertaining as a DM and just trying to make sure that I was entertaining without actually being very creative or very challenging, right? So I was only one leg of a chair. And because that wasn't working, because, you know, the fights weren't set up correctly, basically just nothing was entertaining. So I extrapolated from the mistakes that I was making in those games and extrapolated that to the point of view of Zenith, right? He's running this world like I am running my games. He's loosely running it. He's letting people get away with kind of what they want. And it's making a disruption because there's a bunch of shit happening, but no one's taking care of it, right? So it's like building a bunch of houses, but you forget to sell them. What's the point? And that's basically what I was doing. I was building up a lot of interesting things. I was making a lot of backdrops, but at the end of the day, nothing was really getting done and nothing was happening. And it just really wasn't entertaining. So much in terms of like in the very early stages, those like, especially with the War of Creation in that first stage, more of that was a extrapolation into the realm of me deciding to take it seriously. So before that, I wasn't thinking about the gods and everything. I had like a couple, like the Saints essentially came from when I first made this. I threw out a couple base gods that I was going to start creating from the very beginning. And then I realized, like, again, I'm just throwing names on top of ideas. I'm not actually doing anything with it, right? I'm basically just taking D&D and rewriting the names. That's where the War of Creation idea mindset came from, is I finally decided I need to take this a different direction. I need to make it my own, and I can't just slap new names on things. So the idea of Zenith scrapping it and really getting a handle on things is an in-game metaphor to me scrapping the idea that this is just me telling a story and people just asking questions and me answering. It's, you know, it's a lot more about having a foundation, not necessarily following the rules of the book, but having a foundation of consistency and having a foundation of expectations, right? I may not play like other DMs, but like you and I have talked about a lot, especially one of the things that you're big on as a player is if there is a rule that has been made, doesn't matter if it's from the book or if it's a homebrew rule or if it's a house rule, you want to be able to rely on that rule in the future. You want to say that we have established this rule, so I want to be able to use it. Your biggest thing is, I don't want to kick this rock and I don't have to roll. And I do that 10 times, but the 11th time I now have to make a roll for strength and now I can break my toe. Why? It's the same size rock on the same fucking road. I totally understand. And that's kind of the mindset that I had early on, was I wasn't really thinking about the consistency and I was just trying to tell a story that made people want to come back. But that's a very shallow concept of D&D. You know, again, you know, one of the reasons why I'm very much on the side that if you want to be a DM, it's one thing that if you just, you know, you don't have anyone to play with, you want to get into it, someone has to start. But if you can, always try to be a player first. Because knowing what motivates players is really what I was lacking. I was so interested in being a DM and controlling the story that I forgot to ask myself, would I want to game in this realm? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, that's where taking that point of view of, well, what did that look like for Zenith? Because I came up, I didn't really come up with the story until I really got serious. And then I'm like, well, again, where do I say this story and the origin of High Point happened? And that's where I started piecing together, well, I have been kind of working on this story for a while. And so then I started developing, well, how is it looked from Zenith's point of view? What was going on with Zenith when I was a crap DM? And that's where all of this started happening, where, well, he wasn't doing shit. He was letting the Saints do whatever. And that's why it was crap. And then he came down and was like, no, I got to fix it. And then eventually I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I really want to extrapolate and I really want to lock down a lot of these ideas. I want to get these layers involved and I really want to change things up. This is when I finally got really comfortable with accepting the pop culture and just being like, you know what? Fuck it. If this is going to help me remember, if it's going to help me tell the story, if it's going to help me keep track of things, there's no problem with it. You can call it cheesy, you can call it cheap, you can call it cringe, you can call it cliche. It doesn't matter. If it's fun and it helps you, do it. So I started to truly accept the pop culture aspect of my realm, and that's what led to the Second Great War, the one that you talked about, where I really wanted to really utilize my Saiyans properly, because at this point they were better defined as individuals and not just names on powers and situations and things. But I still wanted to go one step further with it. And that's where that Second Great War really hit home, when I finally decided, like, and this is now years after I finally split from my old gaming group and was no longer gaming with them. That's when I was like, okay, now it's time to make it mine. And that's when all of this stuff started happening. And, I started bringing the music in, and the music also helped, right? I find the songs that fit the situations and the words help paint the picture a little bit more. And that's just where you get to that Second Great War, where the First Great War was essentially me deciding I needed to actually take DM seriously. The Second Great War was when I finally said, I need to stop being so serious. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's exactly how the best way I can put it. First Great War was me telling myself I needed to take DM seriously. Second Great War was I needed to stop being so serious. The Third Great War was me finally coming to terms with how to balance things properly. And that's how we got to where we're at.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and we were talking about, like, whenever you find yourself in a place where you feel like you need correction, generally what happens is we overcorrect.
Yep.
Almost always we overcorrect and we swing. So we're on one side of the spectrum and we swing all the way to the other side. And then it takes a few tries for you to find your center.
Well, I mean, remember like how I did my character sheets. I had made my own character sheet from the ground up, and it was amazing. I loved it. It was beautiful. And now we have like 10% of it on the current character sheet. Why? It's not because anything was bad. But I was overzealous. I had all of these amazing ideas, but then when we finally started playing the game, I'm like, I don't ever use this shit. And you know what that is, though? But here's the funny part. Here's the real thing of why I smile about all of this. It's not that, you should always get better. Like, yeah, you should always have a smile on your face if you are getting better at something. But this isn't what makes me smile about it. Think about this. I started out, I was overzealous. I didn't have a lot, and then I made too much, and then I brought back. I had all of these great ideas. We learned that the ideas weren't always practical, so we got rid of them, right? What else does that sound like? Other than first edition to second edition to third edition to fourth edition. Basically, the reason why I like the idea of benchmarking my realm at the wars is each one indicates essentially the concept of a new edition of my realm. If you were to go back in time in my realm to these time frames, I would slightly adjust the rules so you could fit in. And the idea is that these are my own versions of editions in my realm. So just like with second edition, I mean, think about what was in second edition. Like it just in the other day, we talked about when I talked about my custom class, my homebrew, my personal homebrew class, the Deceptor class. Prerequisites don't exist anymore because D&D realized good idea, good concept, bad delivery, and it's not necessary in the game, right? There's a better way to do it. That's just what I did. I had all these great ideas on my character sheet, and then we got rid of them. I had all these great ideas, or bad, good and bad ideas, and I got rid of them.
No, that's very true.
And that's and that's why I went about it. Not only in reality, you just get better and make the changes, but this is why I went about it, making it in the story of my realm and steeping it, because I get to remember. It's easier to remember the story than it is to remember all the shit that I used to do, right? So the story helps trigger why certain things changed and why they are the way they are. I mean, how else do we tell stories as humans? It's always through story. But
Right.
it it also ties in the concept of D&D. D&D is constantly changed. It's constantly found better ways to do things. It's found better ways to do classes. It's found better ways to do magic. I mean, we used to have spell memorization. Now we have spell slots. You know what I mean? There are some editions, or at least some modules that basically have like a power meter to where you basically have spell points. You know what I mean? So in all of the years D&D has been here, we've gone from a number of spells of a certain level to spell slots to spell points to, you know what I mean? It's like D&D changes, and there's no reason why yours can't change. I just prefer that it goes into the story because it's, again, I don't have to tell my players, oh yeah, don't forget about that didn't happen. It's better to have a driving force behind it and something to intrigue them to want to know why and to want to research more about it.
I'm definitely here for that. So and this is just what I know of your gaming thus far, but is Vixie the only character that has actively experienced one of these? And I don't mean like character, but like player character. Like
Vixie was not in my realm until after the Third Great War, so she has not experienced any of the priors.
Interesting. Have any of your players, even if they don't play with you anymore, have any of them survived a war, so to speak?
Like playing characters, PCs?
Yes, player characters.
Technically,
Played with you.
Technically, two. If you want to be technical, based on the way that you asked that question, there are technically two PCs that have survived a Great War. And on top of that,
their character survived.
Yeah, their PC, the character, survived the Great War. Not only that, both of them survived all three.
Wow.
They just don't know it because they technically they existed, but they weren't there for any of it.
Let me ask you this:
you know one of them. You've met one of them.
Have any of your player characters gamed with you before and after?
Yes. As I said, you've met one of them.
Has the rest of the audience met one of them?
No. Well, actually, yes. Yes, you all have met the player. It's Crow. The character is Crow.
So when was Crow created?
So Crow was created in the recent time frame of High Point. So he created Crow right around when we started the Faction 5. So in the last couple of years, but in the current era of High Point, in the current edition era, whatever you want to call it, after the Third Great War. However, here's where things get spicy. So Crow got a chance to meet the devil, one of my created NPCs. Not the devil as in what most people consider as in like the biblical devil. The devil is a character in my realm that is an NPC actively seeking to gain a god tier power, but by other means never seen before. So currently he has the moniker, he has the title or the name, the devil. That's what he takes. That's what he calls himself. And you can tell.
Is this akin to a mantle? The devil?
He's trying to make it that. So here's the idea. So here's what he's trying to do. Is he's just a very powerful creature, but he wants to basically be a mantle holder, a god, or a god. He wants to prove that he can do it without the normal means, basically without their help. So he's basically been working on this for ages. So essentially, and the way that you know this too, which is interesting, is when you make a deal with them, you get basically a blood swirl around you in a giant circle. It's almost like what looks like a kind of like a devil's trap almost from like Supernatural, but it has a bunch of sigils and everything, and it just kind of like spins around you, and it morphs and changes. Now, if your character happens to know demonic, the language demonic, you'll realize that it's your contract, because the devil's offering to make deals with people. So what he'll do is, if you want to make a deal with him, he'll do this ritual, and the contract will kind of like spiral around you. So it's just a cool little visual, but if you happen to know demonic, you'll see it. But one thing that you happen to notice in there, especially if it's ancient demonic, so you only get bits and pieces unless you actually know ancient demonic, but Crow knew demonic. And the one piece that he's able to discern is whenever it references the devil, because of the way ancient demonic works, it's not written as a name. It's written as a title, and you can't get around that. Like, because the way demonic works, you call yourself Kage, but the way you would write it, and the way it represents it, no one would mistake it for your name. Even if you told them that's your name, the way it looks, that's not your name. And that's how it appears in the contracts. But the idea, his goal, is one day it appears as a name. He wants to actually like force it. And his whole concept is, if he can basically reverse engineer the concept of a god, right? So the god needs a bunch of people to know them. So what happens if you spent the time to get a bunch of people thinking about you and knowing you? Could you literally force the universe to consider you what everyone else considers you? So can you basically create your own mantle? Can you create your own being? So right now, he's the devil, but kind of that earworm concept, if enough people know about it and think about the devil, like think about how we think of the devil, right?
If people are like, hey, you want to go make a deal with the devil?
Right. If you can get that concept into enough people and they push it out there, you can like, again, he understands how Eternals are created. He understands that there are mantles, things that are essences of power, because people think of it and need it. It's essentially there because it exists so much that it basically forms. He's basically trying to make himself the center apex of that, or the epoch of that. He wants to basically be at the center of what he's trying to create. So that's his end goal. And he's already super powerful, but again, he wants to elevate because he got screwed by one of the saints, and he wants revenge. So this is how he's going to get it. He wants to become as powerful as a saint, but he doesn't want to do it the normal way. He doesn't want to get their approval. He doesn't want to get it gifted. He wants to prove that he can do it. So anyway, long story. So let me get back to this. Long story short, he makes a deal with the devil, and he had already wanted to be. Basically, he had created this character. He wasn't having fun at low level, and Lucifer was like, "Hey, man, like, come on, can I just do some higher level shit? Like, do I have to really wait?" And you know me, I like to have fun with my players, and I'm also at this, again, this is the point to where I finally accepted what high point is, and I'm not going to suffer like people fucking with my rules. And I'm not just going to say that I'm not going to let him do it, but you know me, when it comes to a high point, things are important. So he said, can't I just be like a level... Huh? What's up?
So just so I can understand the premise, when this happened, was this post Third War?
Yeah. So post Third War, basically modern high point. Okay. Crow had Crow was a third level character. Lucifer was getting kind of tired and was like, "Can I just make an level 18?" And I'm like, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah." Always be wary when the DM asks if you're sure. So he wanted to be a level 18 character. So and then he was like, "Oh, I want to be like a demonic like demon. That would be kind of cool. Like maybe like a trickster. I could make deals." And I'm like, "I have a class for you. I have a race for you. I got this. I have all of that ready, actually." And I'm like, "And you want to be level 18? You sure?" And you know me, in my realm, it's like there's certain things where you could just go straight by the book, but then there are other things where you need to learn how it works. So he just wanted to make his character straight into level 18. So I allow him to run into the devil. The devil makes a deal that he'll give him immense power. In return, he needs him to go get an item. And it just so happened to be that this item basically was going to be in, he basically sent him to go with the faction 5 because, or with Vixie's character, because that's why he was with you guys, because the devil wanted him there to find a certain item. But that was his task. You do that for me and I'll give you the immense power. That was the pact. And so he did. The devil unleashed Krau's power. So what did the devil do? Well, Krau became a level 18. But he wasn't power leveled. He wasn't given experience points. He wasn't turned into something new. See, Lucifer, way many years ago, created a character back before the First Great War. Back when I was still fucking around as DM. He created a character, fucked around for a little bit. We weren't really having fun. He wasn't having fun. So we ended it, but I ended it on kind of a climaxy-ish idea. And the idea was it was an idea I was playing with. It's actually it was one of the very first things I created that exists still from back then, because I told you things were way too powerful back then. So I created something and I was still messing with the idea. He was kind of getting bored with playing. So I was like, I don't really want to just stop gaming here. And I don't, cause timelines and whatnot. So I ended it with him getting trapped in a very special item called a demon seed, something that I created. I created it for my realm, but it was created by the saint that snapped during the Second Great War, that kicked off the Second Great War. He's the one that created it. Now, here's the funny part, is the in-game lore is technically no one knows when he created it. They know that it existed way before, but a lot of the lore suggests he created it as a way to get back at Zenith after the issue. So there's this weird thing where it existed technically before it's stated that he created it. So that's a unique little lore point that I intentionally throw in there to provide that inconsistency. If you read the lore and if you get into it and if you know about these things, you will find out that technically the lore suggests he created it to get back at Zenith after what had happened. But it is known to have existed before the First Great War.
Interesting.
So I trapped him in this demon seed. And that was just, at the time, just a side thought. I'm telling you, this was 7 years ago. 8 years ago. It was we gamed 2 or 3 sessions. We weren't having fun. So right. I got him into he got through a door, set off a trap, and I trapped him in the demon seed because that's where it was. I had the whole place locked off and he kept trying to get into it, and I finally let him in, and then he got trapped. Another player from way back when also got trapped in a demon seed to end his gaming session because basically they were at the same place, because again, I was brand new, so I only had one thing to do. And they both tried to do the same fucking thing. I put a magical lock on a door, and of course, that tries to get them away. And what do they keep trying to do? Break open the door. It was really not. It was just supposed to be a red herring, but it wasn't actually supposed to be gone into. So when they finally got into it, it was a demon seed. So they both got trapped. And then time passed, real time and in-game time. So when the devil makes this deal that he says, I can unleash great power for you, what he actually did was he essentially, in that exact moment, killed Krau. He pulled out his weapon and actually just murdered Krau. But Krau didn't die in the sense that a mortal body sat there and wilted. When he slashed through him, his existence kind of dissipated. And he explained to him that this is simply a echo. He isn't real. What he's known to exist, this existence of Krau, is simply a projected echo, and it's time for him to wake up. And so I let his original character out of the demon seed at a level 18. And the whole thing is, the demon seed is exactly what it sounds like. It was created to take a creature, put them in a place to where, essentially with enough time, you would twist and distort their soul and slowly feed it energy to where when they came out, they were a basically like a uber demon. The idea was it was created to make uber demons, like better than like Hell Knights. Just they were supposed to be. The idea was an idea that he wanted to experiment to create the ultimate creatures.
Characters, that's very powerful.
And he wanted to go after Zenith, so he wanted to literally take every powerful creature he could and try to basically elevate them to something that had never been seen before. So when the devil released him, that's how I justified turning Crow into a level 18 character. He always was, and it was just a projection outside the demon seed. He was basically getting powerful enough to project himself out. And that's how the devil found him. Because the fun part about all of this, the behind the lore of who the devil actually is, the devil was the very first person to ever go into a demon seed. He was forced into the demon seed for the first time. Came out a very powerful creature. But not only was he the first person to ever go into a demon seed and survive and actually come out, no one knows about Crow. He went back. See, demon seeds are extremely rare. Like there's not many, and to get into one is almost impossible, especially now. Not only was he forced into one when he got out, he actually found his way back in. No one knows how, but the myth is that he actually found his way back into one twice.
Was he mortal before?
He was. Well, kind of. He was immortal, then he was a very low-level demon, and then he was thrown into a demon seed. And he was only a demon because he made a very bad deal and lost a deal, and then became a demon, got thrown into a demon seed, went crazy, came out, tried to get revenge on his boss who threw him in the demon seed. That didn't work, so he devoted himself to finding another demon seed to go back in to get more powerful, and now here he is. And in the second demon seed is where he became aware of this new idea after he came out of the second demon seed.
Okay.
And the thing about demon seeds is like getting out, you can't choose to get out. Like it is just you go in and that's it. There is no time frame. There's
like
no
the
idea.
Zone from Superman.
So the way I describe the demon seed, I love this description. So when you go into a demon seed, the experience that you have is you're conscious. And you're always conscious. There is no sleep. So that's the first thing, is you are always conscious. Secondly, as far as you can tell, you have no body. Like, you can move, like, you have the sense that you're sitting here and you could do this, but you can't do this. You would feel yourself just doing this. For like, you have the idea that you can move, but you have no proof you have a body. Right? So that's already the next thing is, you're not sure if you have a body because you can't confirm it to yourself. The next part, visual. You can see technically. So inside the demon seed, what it is it's absolute void. It's black, right? Complete void. If you try to look around, the scenery never changes. Except in this void, what it seems to be impossibly far in the distance, but extends all the way to your peripheral, both up and down, is the thinnest, almost imperceivable strip of white. Almost imperceivable, but in the vast void of everything, it's there. And even if you try to use what feels like your body to look around, the view never changes. So even though you feel like you're looking around, all you ever get is void with the most imperceptible white line in the distance that goes up and down, which is essentially to mimic the idea that the demon seed has the closing part, and that's the exit. But it's meant to drive you mad. The whole point is to drive you mad.
Can you change the orientation of that white line?
No. It never changes. It basically, it's like it's as if you were looking at an image that's burned into your eyes. You can't ever change what you look at. All it is just...
Or is it always directly in front of you?
It's always right there, directly in your middle of your sight.
Right.
But again, it seems impossibly far away, and it's extremely thin, but it's the only thing that you can see. And it's the idea of giving you hope, right? Like everything that was designed about this is to drive you mad, is to keep you awake for however many eons that this would lock you in there, tear away all aspect of hope, and it's slowly feeding you energy and corruption. And eventually you're supposed to come out.
Pain in this place?
You feel nothing.
It's like a sensory deprivation chamber.
It's literally just your mind.
So,
it's you. It's just you.
Have you heard about?
But you can't hallucinate because you technically don't have
Have you heard about that room that's like the quietest room in the world?
Yes.
And if you go in there, like the person that's spent the longest in there is like 45 minutes. Like you can't. Yeah.
It's similar. It's basically similar to that, but since you don't have a body, you wouldn't have the heartbeat, the rushing of blood in your ears. But yes, you basically imagine sensory deprivation because you don't have a body, but you're aware of it for eons.
That's crazy.
So that's what the demon seed is. So that's how I got Crow basically regenerated because
level 18 GB. Did he rattle 666 on 3 minutes? Oh, that's funny.
No, he just said he wanted to be a level 8 and he wanted to do all that stuff. So I had trickster demons in my realm already, and I basically made him one. The downside is that, like I said, he didn't want to learn anything, right? He just wanted to be it. So I gave him the specs that I had created, but the problem that he didn't understand was because he was a race, and he had this like specialty situation with his class and everything. He had a very special situation where he was a trickster demon, both race and class. Like that's what he was. That's what it turned him into. And he had all of this power from the demon seed. So the problem that he was facing is that he had 2 pools of magic to pull from that he didn't understand. He had the demon seed level magic, basically like he had that to fuel it, but he also had his like Hellion magic because he's a trickster demon. So his magic essentially works by making deals. He can't use magic except when in the process of making a deal, but if you're clever enough, you can really get creative with how to use that magic as long as it rides within the confines of the deal, which is why the most powerful, trickster demons are usually the most clever. This is not about the power level, it's about how you use your power, because you're locked into the deal and the intentions behind both people. So you have to learn how to manipulate, like the spell, like your magic is reliant on both parties. So that's why trickster demons are very, very careful with how they make deals, because you can't just, it's not just about what was said or what's written down. You have to take into account the intentions of both parties. So trickster demons are manipulative, not because they want the most out of the deal. It's they need to make sure the power works the way they want it to. Because if you just go up to a trickster demon and say, I'll sell you my soul for $100, and it's just flat out like that, like, that's one thing. Whereas, if you want to be like, okay, so you want to be rich. There's a big difference between, getting them to be like, well, what would, it's not like the whole, I'm going to play on the word, so I'm going to give you 100 deer instead of $100. But the mindset is when they just ask a flat question, trickster demons don't like that because it's hard to really infer your exact intentions, and they don't know how that's going to affect the magic spell. So they want to really talk with you. That's why trickster demons are all about really getting on your side. They're not there to guarantee, you're already calling upon them. They're not there to get, you've already sealed the deal. You've called them. The deal is on the table. They are going to make the deal. The difference is the details. It's not about how do I get the most out of you. It's how is this magic going to work? Because I have agendas that I need to do. I have deals with other people. And if your mind, mortal, fucks with my magic, you could screw a deal I have with someone who says maybe I have to do something on every deal, right? So every trickster demon has a different set of rules on how they deal with their clients, because they have to be very careful with not only what's said and what the deal is made, but the intentions and the mindsets of both parties involved. Which is why that's why you can see trickster demons can turn down deals. It's not about constantly making deals. It's about making the right deals. So he wanted to be that, but that's one level of magic. He also had his entire, manipulation from the demon seed to pull from. So we had a whole different type of magic that would work differently. So anytime he cast magic, I'd have him make a roll because he didn't understand how to control what side he was pulling from. So I'd have to make him a roll, which is why if you remember, that's when he tried to call that, he tried to summon a hellhound. It messed up. Are you muted? Did I mute you? I couldn't hear you for a second. Are you?
You still hear me?
Okay, yeah, there you are. For some reason, I thought you couldn't hear me, or I thought I couldn't hear you for a second. But yeah, so that's why that spell had failed, because he doesn't understand how to use his magic, right? But again, another thing that worked out in my favor. I'd never intended to bring that character back. But when he wanted a level 18 character and I needed to scramble to figure out what would make the most sense, meeting the devil, who obviously is very familiar with demon seeds, who could feel the presence of a demon seed projection, and who knows how to use that projection to find the demon seed and open it, perfect situation. He can now let someone out who owes him something. And how better to test out what this new demon seed seedling can do than set him out on a very important quest and then just see what happens in the background. So it perfectly made sense to do that with his character, but it also kind of bit him in the ass because he didn't really know how to use the character. And that was just because that was my little way of saying, like, don't be greedy. Or be prepared.
That's funny.
But it was fun. I still like the character, and the character is very useful. He's using it kind of as a background. Like, instead of constantly gaming, we'll just do like quick little updates with each other, and then he'll just let me know like what he wants the character to kind of be working on, and it really lets me use that character to basically inflict things around the world that I need to be happening.
Okay.
So yes, to answer your question, yes, there is a character still survived, but he wasn't part of it, but he did technically survived from the beginning to the end. And I say two because that means that there is technically one character still locked in the demon seed somewhere.
Yeah, and but that one has not.
He never came back, so
gamed back.
Yeah.
Okay. So another question. There was the point where you talked about, I'm guessing it was Dice's oath.
Oh, the vow that he made against the technological future, the banishment of magic.
Yes. So there are a couple of things, because first, Dice was your original character, right?
Yeah, very first D&D character ever.
He's the one who ascended to godhood, right?
Yeah, he became Zenith.
So he became Zenith, but in your articulation towards the end, you specifically said that when he became Zenith, he could no longer be Dice. He could no longer be who he was.
Which is why he allowed Dice to continue. So technically, from Dice's point of view,
what ended up happening is you said you stopped him at a certain point, right?
I stopped who?
You stopped when you like put him in stasis, or you locked him away, or whatever happened to Dice happened at the moment of his ascension.
Oh, okay. So let me clarify that. So here's essentially the details with Dice. So because of when you ascended to godhood the way that Dice did, you're basically gifted with the omnipotent information. So when I was gifted godhood, the god of the realm essentially gifted us with, the knowledge of a god. So it's kind of instantaneously having the internet in your head. You know everything, but that doesn't mean you know everything. You still have to look it up. I got a smartphone in my pocket. I can answer any question that you ever ask me. Doesn't mean I know everything. And that's kind of the way that he represented godhood, which I kind of liked, especially when it came to gameplay as godhood, because gaming never stopped. Just because we became a god doesn't mean I stopped gaming. So there is god level, god tier gaming, and a lot of that comes down to that idea that just because like in terms of godhood, if you have a sphere of influence, if you have an area that your influence, your followers, you have stuff there, you can always look, right? You have like omnipotent sight, right? You have all around vision, but everywhere you have influence. But that doesn't mean you see everything all at once. You still have to focus in, right? Just because it's always there, you can set cues to go off as alarms, but that's still Like kind of like in Bruce Almighty when they talk about how the prayers come in, you get every prayer, but that doesn't mean you know every prayer, right? That's where it that mindset comes in, right? So that's the instantaneous
enter.
Yeah, so that's the instantaneous moment when you ascend. So the godhood process is jarring, and it takes a while to get used to. But at the same time, it also kind of gives you that concept of infinite time where you're going to live forever, but at the same time, you can experience a century in a mortal's second, right? So my ascension, although it was instantaneous, was also an eternity for Zenith. So I ascended, and all of that happened over the course of an eternity, but at the same time, over the course of the blink of an eye. From Dice's perspective, when he accepted the ascension, he saw a flash of light and then opened his eyes and nothing was changed. The only difference from his point of view is that he accepted it, kind of closed his eyes, accepted it, kind of saw the black flash of white light, and then was still standing there. But instead of being like confused or ticked off, he was just left with the understanding that he wasn't mind wiped. It wasn't like he knew.
It's not you.
Yeah, it's like you've ascended, but I'm still me. I'm still Dice. And it was the comfort of, it wasn't like, he programmed him to be this way. It was more of in that ascension eternity, in that 1 second, he realized, like you were saying, I got here because of Dice. Dice got me here. And I am fundamentally different. I am going to be neutral God. I am not going to be the way that Dice is. But look at what happened. Look at the influence and the impact Dice made on things. That was too much of an asset to let go. So because you were allowed to create avatars and things, I made a super powerful avatar, which is not normally what you do when you first become a god, but I made a super powerful one that basically allowed me to continue to let Dice live as he did before Ascension, like the moment before Ascension, and just continue. So he knows that he ascended.
Dice is an avatar of Zenith?
He was an avatar of Zenith, but kind of like the Saints are in that realm's version where he was an autonomous one. So Dice was not Zenith. Dice never had godlike power. Dice could not funnel it, and Zenith never allowed Dice to channel it. Dice was a absolute separate entity now because he felt that was the best use of Dice, is being who he was. And if he got to immortalhood, imagine what else he could do. I mean, if Dice became a god, imagine what else he could accomplish.
Before Dice became a god, where was he at? What was he?
Dice was, I think, by that point, I think we were close to 20th level. And I think I was still I can't remember. Okay, so what I think I don't think I was triple classing at that point. I think I was dual classing. I want to say I was like a fighter rogue or a rogue fighter. I think it was fighter rogue was the official thing, but based on it was because I was a fighter by training. Like I was trained to be a fighter. I was like mainly a fighter, but I learned to be a rogue out of necessity. So I always considered my thieving to be, again, I wasn't a thief. I just learned to live off the streets because of my growing up. But I wanted to be more of a professional thief, not a like low-level thief. Kind of wanted to be known and all of that stuff. But I also had fighting ability. And then eventually I was able to start casting magic, but through other means. I don't think that was another class. So there was another way I was able to cast magic. It's been a long time.
Yeah. Okay.
It was affiliations and things like that.
Casting abilities, primarily skills as a fighter, but like
I definitely leaned into the rogue aspect. So I mean, I was definitely more daggers and short sword. Usually, if I could, I would try to do ranged daggers, and yeah, I wasn't really deep into fights, but I would jump in, do a bunch of attacks, jump out of battle, kind of thing.
And I'm guessing, kind of based off of the creation of the Deceptor class in the first place, a large part of Ice's, I guess, I don't want to say mentality, attitude, whatever, but is a lot of it's focused around deception and
So the
not being
Deceptor
what you
class was made
seem.
by a different character of mine, not Dice.
Oh,
So that
that's
was
right.
under a different mindset.
That's
Yeah.
right. That was
So Dice was very
bad.
secretive. Dice had been backstabbed too many times, so Dice was very secretive about his information. But he was always on a new goal set. Like Dice was just always very driven. So once he set himself to do something, it was just a constant work of effort to get there. So yeah, he was basically just a doer. He would find something that he wanted accomplished or information that he wanted, and he would go try to accomplish it. I mean, his biggest thing was he wanted to be known for his skill sets, and he wanted to essentially never have to worry about money, but he also didn't want to be bored. And that was
Right.
that was were his major motivations. But he also had his spouts of revenge and vengeance and things of that sort that got him off his
So
track.
when you start talking about dice being dangerous,
So you're talking about in
what's
current
the
high
most
point.
dangerous part? Was that?
You mean in terms of high point? Like why
Yes.
I say he's dangerous for high point.
Because he's locked away. He's not allowed to do anything right now.
Right. So I should
And
also bring that part in. So yeah. So when I ascended, that was back in the old realm, and things continued. I played as Dice normally, played as Zenith normally. When Zenith finally came back to high point and finally started like doing his own thing, eventually he realized that there was always going to be that missing part, right? And he wanted to know like what better way to challenge himself, what better way to expand the world than to, bring the best mortal he knew to do that, which was Dice. But he also knew how powerful, how clever, how manipulative Dice was. He knew the things, I mean, he knew what Dice was capable of, which is why he wanted him here, because he was capable of so much. But it's a timing thing, right? Right. It was too early on to let Dice roam free, but it being neutral, it was a kind of a holdover of it's not fair to not bring him here. Like, I wouldn't even have this without him, right? So,
so
and the original Dice is still locked away, right? The original Dice is in that other realm, locked away forever. He's in the old realm. But what Zenith did was recreated Dice at the snapshot before he escaped, because of course he snapshotted all of his stuff before he left, right? Before he went through the crack and found his way to High Point. So he basically did what he did before, created a version of Dice at that snapshot, but realized that by letting him out, especially that early on, before all of those changes, all of the wars happened, and all of the structure that I made, it was just one of those out of game. I wasn't going to play Dice as my own character to test the realm yet, but B, I just know what kind of player I am. So the idea was he'll escape, or he'll be upon the world when it's his time. Kind of the prophecy idea. Like Zenith always knew he will be out. It's just a matter of will he be ready for it. So he locked him away, and essentially, again, he's neutral. So it's not the whole he doesn't want to take full control. It's not how the world works. It's not
this
how
is the
High Point runs.
mentality of you trying to fuck with your own shit.
Yeah. So it's that whole thing of once he puts him out there, it's not like he's going to decide when he comes out. Maybe he comes out too early. Maybe he comes out late. Maybe he comes out on time. But the point is Dice is in High Point, but he is locked away. And it just is going to eventually come down to a series of events that will release him. And when he gets released, we'll see what happens. If you don't remember, specifically when we played the Discord, the Orc campaign.
Yeah.
When you guys,
or was it the Delvenholm one?
it was both. That was in the same
Oh.
time frame. Remember, those are just two
Oh.
different locations. Those are just two different locations for two different characters, but you guys were in the same area. When you guys had the shrine, and you went in there, and it showed the shrine of all of the gods, and there was the one in the middle of the current god, but it wasn't Zenith. That was the whole thing about, remember you guys were in that alternate future, the potential future of
Okay.
the dark days of High Point? There's a new
Yeah.
god that had taken over.
I do remember that.
That god's Dice.
That's what I'm saying. Okay. Okay, so does
So
that mean
in an
because the way
alternate future, if certain things happen or don't happen,
so does that mean that the way that Dice ascended in this particular future, he was able to stay Dice?
yes, because Dice took over and became a god. But remember, the way that he originally became a god was under a different set of rules. Here, Dice became powerful enough to ascend himself under different rule sets. He wasn't gifted it. He didn't become a new entity. He ascended into godhood.
This wasn't you have a bunch of knowledge now. This is, hey, you as you are now have X, Y, and Z abilities.
Yeah,
X, Y, and Z
I mean, he
power
still
on
gets
par with.
the knowledge dump and everything, but the difference was like when you ascended in my DM's realm, it was a lot more about like you are ascending, but you choose everything about your new essence, right? Like what you're the god of, and everything basically starts from square one because you're a god now. You get so Zenith decided to be a true neutral god. So he's neutral. Dice was not. So by all of those changes, he knew that he could no longer be Dice if this is the god he wanted to be. When Dice ascended in High Point, Dice didn't want to change anymore. Dice was like, no, I'm not getting locked up by another fucker because I'm staying mortal. So when he ascended, there was no I'm changing my identity. There was no I'm changing my alignment. There was no I'm keeping my mortal self alive. This time, this version of Dice said, fuck that. Fuck Zenith. You're not doing that to me again. I'm taking the power and I'm staying myself. So all
Is
the
that
same
why
concept. He still became a god, but he didn't do
is
what
that why
Zenith
he
did.
felt some type of way about Zenith and came for him once he got out?
Yeah, the reason why there was a conflict and the reason why he took over, part and partial was vengeance, but it was also a difference in mindset on how to run things. And because we've talked about this recently, unlike Zenith, which we talked about this off stream, how through all of this and through the fact that he, is a true neutral god, Zenith never gave up on his vow, but slowly shifted the mindset of understanding the essence of all things exist, right? He is no longer in a place that he could prevent that realm from being taken over by technology, but what he can do is make sure that magic thrives here, right? So his vow is remained the same, but he doesn't have the same motivation as he did because he understands the circumstances, right? We talked kind of about that of why Zenith kind of elevated himself beyond that vow, but still holds on to it, and we see that in how he made High Point. But Dice is the same snapshot from that past world and is unchanged. So when Dice comes to High Point and sees Zenith isn't doing everything to prevent that and isn't basically mounting an assault and isn't doing anything that could lead to that preventative future, he was disappointed. He also didn't like how Zenith ran things because they don't see eye to eye because Zenith is true neutral. And he was in a new world. And what did I always like to do as Dice? I like to fuck with shit. So if certain things are to happen and certain things are not to happen, and Dice is released, he has every chance of taking over. And that was the whole kind of concept, is the whole point of that. I mean, we're probably never going to go back to that Discord, but the whole point of that is, remember, we started talking about Underholm. There was that NPC who had mentioned Underholm, and you guys were supposed to go there. Underholm is basically it was supposed to be a hidden vault that eventually eroded over time and became found. It's all of its like defenses wore away, so it was able to be found. And essentially, it's a vault, and it is Dice's vault of during the war when he took over. It's a vault of all of his, like, it was a private vault of all of his of all of the trophies and all of the things that he had. And basically, when you guys got there, when you guys finally made it to Underholm, there was going to be other stuff for your guys' campaign, but I strategically placed things in there for specifically you, Lucifer, and Vixie to see. You as players, not as characters. Your characters wouldn't know anything of it. But there were going to be items in that vault that were Easter eggs for you guys as players. And each one was supposed to...
Dob's staff was going to be in there.
And each one was supposed to give you all an indication of... Like, basically, it was supposed to be a small, subtle implication of you can potentially lead to this. Not that you did, but it was supposed to be that implication of, oh, I know what that is. And it wasn't your staff, by the way. It wasn't Dob's staff.
Dang.
It was part of your dad's journal.
Oh.
Like, part of it. As in, not fully in half, but as in opened and then tore at the spine. Part of it. Yeah, that's a whole bad because you know it's because you remember how magical your journal is. Remember how your journal works?
Part of the prophecy was on there too. What's that?
But remember how your journal works, right? Like how it's all organized and kind of like a little bit magical in terms of how big it is. So yeah, so the fact that it was torn in half is just an old mindfuck because normally when magical items like that are torn in half, they explode. Because it still would have been slightly magical. So there's a whole, again, it would have been, no one else would have known what it meant. Like it just literally would have been some journal like of someone's escapades with like missing pieces, but you would have known what it was. Vixie would have found the heart scale pendant.
Yep.
Her character would have found the heart scale pendant. That's a big deal. Crow would have found his character would have found the makeshift shield dagger when you guys fought at the docks in Septim's Tier, and you guys did that massacre when you guys snuck into that, like the bandits that stole the carts and you massacred them, like literally just slaughtered them all. And at one point you guys made the little makeshift dagger out of one of the magical dragon scales that you found, so that would have been there.
Oh yeah,
because Crow had taken that after that fight. So he would have found that item. And all of these aren't just there to be, callbacks to your characters. Each and every one of these items was meant to cue you in that somehow this was used to lead to this future. Therefore, it was supposed to cue you guys in on your choices matter, right? Because it was an item that every single one of you, each one of you were going to see an item that your character specifically, not only just specifically held on to, but was very, very attached to, right? You on your dad's journal, Crow really liked that dagger. Her whole entire main campaign was about that heart scale pendant. So yeah, it was going to be a really interesting like Easter egg concept of, and then I was going to throw in some other things just to kind of like get you guys to be interested in your original characters. But yeah, that was supposed to be the whole that whole like reveal was supposed to just really inspire you guys to be like, oh shit, this we could have been the cause of this. And that's why I always preface it as an alternative future, because I didn't want to, I don't know what you guys will do, but I know that if you guys don't all do certain things, that could be a future that happens. And therefore, I wanted to really drive home how important, again, because, I had made all of that also when we were still early on in gaming with all of your characters. Right. So it was another way for me to drive home just how important your guys' gaming sessions were. And hopefully that also explains when I talk to you guys about, hey, I need a couple days to game or a couple weeks because I need the, the butterfly effect to kick in. This is what I'm talking about. These are examples of the butterfly effect of me trying to figure out where it all stacks. So,
no, it's legit.
Yeah.
It's legit. Okay, so before the stream started, I tried to. I think you found a better. Video for it than I did, but we. Looks like.
So your own world affects all things. Nice indeed. Yes. So I'm very specific on trying to make the fact that mine is a just evolving living, breathing world that my players are in. They're not just interacting with, but they're in it. So when someone creates a character in my realm, I don't just take their character backstory and go, oh, I can mess with that. I can throw in an NPC or I can use your backstory info. I try to find out how it's going to best fall into play with what's already in the history and make sure that they know any major key backstory issues or anything that would have been affected or that they would have experienced that really would make sense. And as well, everybody, even if you're not on the same timeline, because everybody can be sometimes in a different timeline, it is the same universe. So, and Kage can attest to this, different players in different gaming groups can see the effects of others. Whether it's before or after, different gaming sessions, but they absolutely can overlap. A lot of them have met each other. They've met each other's characters in different situations. But yes, it's that concept of every layer affects it, which is why I do tell them, like, when they make major things, it's just kind of a headache sometimes for me, because I do have to sit there and take into account, okay, what is going to be affected by this, and how do my other players, how might they run into it, right? Like right now, I mean, there are towns that Kage's character Doft has visited that are basically ghost towns now because of what Crow had done in his campaign, because he poisoned a giant cattle supply. He basically went to one of the larger mini towns that basically did all the cattle and started practicing with diseases. So I basically had to shut down a bunch of towns now because they can't survive without the only, basically supplier in the area. And then I had to figure out some diplomatic issues between some of the major cities because, well, trade routes get interrupted, people get cranky, a lot of stuff happens. So yeah, I really try to make it I don't try to make everything interact with everybody, but the major things that they do, need to matter. Like the docks, what we were talking about. They found some people who had stolen some carts, or they needed to steal some carts from some really shady people. They were going to go in, they wanted to sneak in, they were going to do an encounter, and then it literally just turned into a bloodbath. They just all got into position. They were like, okay, we're just going to start, like, we're all in position. No, they don't know we're here. We're just, someone's going to go first, and we're just going to kind of just try to take them out silently. And what ensued was not an encounter, was not combat. What ensued was them literally just butchering these fucking bandits left and right. And even Crow tried to be really
object as a weapon. Okay, blunt object.
I'm just saying, y'all wrecked their worlds. I mean, we're talking about, like, I think everybody rolled at least 120, so everyone at least crit damaged at least once. I think I think most of the enemies either missed or crit failed, and it was over in like 2 rounds, which means they didn't even get a chance to alert anybody. I mean, it was so fast. And then what Crow did at the end, he tried to be so menacing. He tried to do this thing where he wanted, like, people to remember and have a fear of, like, him. So he did this thing where he walked up to one of them and he said this creepy thing of, like, trying to tell him that it was never us, like, blah, blah, blah. But then he wanted to, like, use burning hands on his face to, like, blind him. So he was like, it was never us. And then he wanted to do that, but the dude was so low in health, as soon as he cast burning hands, I'm like, he's dead. You sear his face, and then as you come off, he sits there lifeless. I'm just like, what did you expect, bro? But it was just so gruesome that
your hand. I'm like, get out of here.
Like, it was so gruesome, I had to effectively permanently change the mood of the docks. The docks used to be, like, mostly not, like, super bustly and peppy, but the docks weren't necessarily a negative place. They were just a general place where people had generally good spirits. After this, the docks are depressing. Like, some of the it's not like places left because this isn't like a major city, so it's not like people can really leave, but it's definitely like there's a higher, guard presence.
It's the sketchy
it's
part.
It's permanently changed, and it's because of you guys. Wally also says there's a set story going on behind them, but their story affects different things throughout the gameplay. So kind of, yeah. So essentially, there's always stuff going on, but I'm not one to, like, plan out campaigns or anything. So everything with my players is essentially, it's player driven. So they set their own goals and they set what they want to do. Most of the time, they're really just dealing with the consequences of their actions, right? So they can go accept any job from anybody, and then they can ditch any job from anybody. but that doesn't mean that that person's going to not remember, right? You ditch out on a job from a king, the next time you come by and say, hey, I want a favor, you might just get thrown in jail because you ditched out on him, right? Some people, you might find out that, some people are, you owe money somewhere because someone, you didn't do something and you forgot. So it's one of those things where, yeah, there are tons of stories going on in the background, and I do have like the development of everything, but I guess I wouldn't really say I have a main story in the background unless you count what Zenith is doing. But most of that is more for the lore building and for the players to interact with once they're inside. I try to let the world evolve with the players instead of the players trying to keep up with an evolving world, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I have like the prophecies and I have major things that they could get into, but again, it's enticing them to want to go after it. Oh, we got a new follow. Life of Dice, thank you so much for the follow. Appreciate you, and welcome.
Nice. Facts.
But
welcome, my friend.
When it comes down to like those overarching things, like, there are major storylines that are going on that will continue as they progress, whether they interact with it or not. My job is really to try to entice them to interact with it because they really involve them, right? Like what we were just talking about, like the release of Dice. That's going to obviously really involve my players, but trying to force them to care is not my job. I want them to care and want them to go after it. So I set some conditions and some kind of, I insinuate that there'll be consequences, but I don't want to just be like, this is what's happening, and if you don't do anything, the world's going to end. It's more of a, we really suggest you do this, and I really hope it's enticing to you because I really want to see what happens. And if you don't, I'll just find out what happens if you've never interacted with it. But it's not like I'm there being like, you have a countdown. It's more of a, I really want to see this through. But if you don't, I'll have a contingency. And it says, I only use that as the realm is growing without a direct intervention of the group, such as the royals and things of court. So story. History as it comes to the front of the timeline. Yes. So if I read that correctly, yes, you're absolutely right. You had it right the first time is yeah. So the world is there. The world doesn't directly need their input, but the world does evolve as they progress through it, with or without them on all levels. And again, that just, I think that keeps it fun for me, because I think a lot of DMs also forget that you're part of the game. You're a player too, right? It's not that your players are playing your story. It's that you are all playing D&D and you are all collaboratively narrating this story, and the dice are there to help some of the, some of the key moments. But I look at it as, if I just wrote the story out and just waited for you guys to interact with it, there's only so much fun I can have with that. I would much prefer to work the game and the storyline with you guys and with my players, so we can have this situation where I'm getting to basically play my game in my realm with my players, right? I'm waiting for them to make decisions, waiting for them to progress that time clock, so then I can see what my, what my turn is, right? Because the environment works with them. But yeah, absolutely, just like you said, I much prefer the idea that I have things happening in the background, but I'm always trying to push for that not forceful go there and look what's happening, but I always like to give them reasons to want to, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And then you guys should definitely check out the Discord if you guys want to. Definitely want to know what you guys think about the streams. If you guys have any topics in mind, you can submit those at the Discord as well.
Oh yeah, that'll be very exciting. I want to start posting stuff in there.
1580 after Da Vinci and the science breakthroughs and the clergy and the breakout of all religions of that time. Your timeline, your time frame for your realm and what you're building is gonna. I really want to hear more about it as you develop it, because what you're playing with right there is that breakout of science and trying to deal with the backlash of religion. Such a great concept. That is going to be such a fun
intrigue. Ever watch
intrigue.
The non-Brotherhood version of Full Metal Alchemist?
I tried, but I think I ended up going with Brotherhood because it was supposedly a better recap.
It definitely is. The Brotherhood is 100% follows the anime, but I started watching before follows the manga, but started watching before that got finished, and so I just watched it all the way through my first time around. And when I got to the very end, they had a movie that kind of like tied up the conclusion, and basically there was a premise that on the other side of the gate, like, because there was this like gate of knowledge that like reached through and took Ed's arm and leg.
Oh,
his body, but like there was this
the nothing
different
god
conclusion that on the other side of that gate was a completely different world where alchemy didn't exist. Very similar to the story that you guys were talking about, but like instead of going the route of alchemy, they went the route of technology and the steam engine, and so they had like way different things. Like they had actual cannons, they had tanks, they had what are those freaking giant things? The Hindenburg, the blimps looking things.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Airships.
It was crazy, and it was very interesting, and I don't know. This gives me very similar vibe. Like I would be so down to like play D&D in a world like that. I think that would be so cool.
Yeah, well, it says he fell asleep during the first 10 minutes, so no go on him. But he also says that the Shadowrun idea of a rift opening up and bringing magic back to the realm, that's not a bad idea too. Like I do like when people play around with locking away certain things, and how I like the ideas of how people bring that stuff back out and like bring access to it. Again, just showing examples of this. I'm not saying that this is the way everyone should make their realm, but like what we had to talk on Monday, it's about the layers. It's not about the details, right? Like I could sit here and talk for hours about all of the details and all of the reasons of High Point, but these layers, these top layers that we're talking about, these, I think, are what set apart a intriguing backstory, right? Because let's face it, nobody wants to hear 20-minute, like a monologue about, why a particular king got to be a king when your job is going to be to go, deliver something for the king's mage, right? Like,
that makes it way more engaging if it's relevant,
right? Like it's that disconnect to me. Like even finding out more about the mage, but you don't care. It has nothing to do with the job. It won't enrich what you're doing. It only enriches the backstory, which isn't a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to want to have an enriching backstory and having enriching, lore and setting. But not a lot of people resonate with that, especially when they're trying to actually play the game, because there's so much information. But if it doesn't matter, if it doesn't change the gameplay, it just becomes info, right? It just becomes data in your head. Whereas when I try to do my approach, it's more of that I'm going to give you what you need to play the game, and then I'm going to let you tell me what information you need to make your decisions, right? So if I give you a few hints about what's around you, but you start asking about one of them, that's the one we're going to go with. That's the one I'm going to put all the detail in, because that's the one that you asked for. I'm not saying that you tell me what we're going to game on, but you're telling me what your interest is, right? If you walk into a shop and I give you a handful of things that you see, and you go, but do I see this? I already now have an idea of where your mindset is as a player. So now I'm going to backload all of the gameplay around what you just said, right? I'm going to start shifting the gameplay into that area that you're interested in, instead of saying, nope, but they do have this item over here. Right over here. Yeah? No? You want to... No, that item just got sold. Someone else bought it. But this item over here? I don't like that gameplay. Whereas if it's more of a... So there's a really interesting item over here. That's cool, but I'm really interested in this. And I'm like... All right, we're going to ignore that item. And that's fine. But then I get to think like, well, if he doesn't have that item, what does that mean?
What does this item do?
And that's now my game. That is me getting to play the game. Instead of me trying to keep track of where you are in the story and trying to figure out and trying to make you guys do certain things, or it's now, you have now given me a gameplay, right? When I tell you, you walk into a room, there's a door on your left and a door on your right, what do? When you tell me I leave the room, that's the same fucking thing. I know what's behind the other two doors. I didn't think about you fucking turning around and leaving. No, just like you have a choice, I have a choice of what does that mean? And that, to me, is the type of gameplay I really like. I don't necessarily understand why DMs get upset when plans don't come together. I think it's because again they're so invested in seeing it happen, whereas I don't have anything like that. I have so much that can be
it's
seen.
funny because
I'm just excited to see what you come across.
you're answering a lot of my questions before I even ask them.
That's good.
Uh,
I forgot
one
we were
of
still.
the
You still
one
need to
of
interview
the
me.
one of the questions that I was going to ask you was because at the very beginning you mentioned how one of the things that you really enjoyed is like the game of wits between DM and player,
Yeah.
right? You know, it was one of the things that like got you into it. And whenever I think of that, going back to anime again, I don't know if you've seen this one, Wally, but Death Note.
Oh,
It
love
really
Death
gives me
Note.
the
Love
vibe of
Death
like
Note.
L and Light, just going at it each other, like playing this like forever game of chess of like, oh, I'm doing this, oh, I'm doing that.
And
Like,
that's 100%. No, that's 100% how I look at it, because if you look at how they did it, it's a constant battle of attrition of knowledge, right? It's at first it's you're aware of each other, then it's there's some sort of pattern. Then it's why does your pattern follow a school kids thing? Then it's you discovered that. Now I have to change that pattern. Oh wait, why did that pattern change? Did they discover that we discovered it? It's that constant back and forth of what do you know and what do you know they know and what do you know that they know that you know. And that's what I
so
really liked about
one
it,
of
because
the
that's how it
one of the
feels when you're going against like a DM who is challenging you.
one of the things that I I would like to experience is being able to like do something in a game where I get to keep a secret from the DM. And be like, hey DM, I'm gonna do this, but I'm not gonna tell you what it is. So like, hey, I'm gonna store something. I'm gonna store a spell in this rock, but I don't want you to know what spell it is until later, right? Because I almost want to give like an element of surprise to the DM of like, hey, all right,
See, the
so
problem with
I'm gonna
that though
get this.
is even though you might have like a good honesty system, that is also just very difficult because it does kind of do the whole thing of like, even if you say I'm writing it down and I'm just going to hold it here, it does make it more difficult because again, for most DMs, I think that would be great. I think actually a lot of DMs could benefit from that. It wouldn't benefit from me just because of the way that I'm constantly evaluating everything. So the understanding of
But
what
think
is
about
there.
how even you've mentioned to us as players how it's hard for us to, at times, accomplish certain things if we have metagame knowledge in our heads,
Right.
right? So, like, being able to not approach a situation with bias because, oh, I know what you're about to do,
Mm-hmm.
or, oh, I know this skeleton's vulnerable to bludgeoning damage, or I know whatever, X, Y, and Z. Like, it's that kind of concept. So, like, if, say, I cast a spell into a rock, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it'll go off, like, what's it, warding, something. There's like a thing where you can, like, cast, it takes you like an hour to cast it, and you can basically store a spell in something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like runes.
You can set it to like trigger on a certain effect,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So if
conditionary
I
spells.
set up this like trap, or I say I was every day for a long time, I was like, I had this book, and I was just casting it in this book over and over and over again every day. And so every single day, like another page would have. Now it probably cost me money and all this extra stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
I just never said what the spell is that I was casting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then one day, give this book to somebody, right? And like there's words in the book, there's whatever, but I give this book to somebody, and the trigger is when somebody reads the first sentence in the book, like it'll go off, and then it'll cause like a chain reaction for all the other things to go off. Now, what that thing is, you know, if I bring it to you and I'm like, hey, I cast Fireball on all these pages, so when this thing goes off and I hand it to them, they read the first thing, it's gonna blow up like a freaking atomic bomb. It's gonna do a stupid amount of damage to everybody within the blast radius or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I want to approach a situation and like try and plan and strategize in a way to hopefully, be clever and become successful, it would feel like, in the same way the DM, doesn't know certain, or like the us players wouldn't know certain things. The enemies, the environment, the world might not know certain aspects of what a player would do. And very similar to like if I just thought of in the last second, oh, I want to cast this spell right now. The DM didn't think about that. Nobody thought about that, right? Well, I planned it ahead of time doesn't necessarily make it any less
It really
creative.
all depends on the context of the situation, because like what you're talking about, the only downside to doing that and the reason why I wouldn't allow something like that is not because I'm looking for the opportunity to metagame, but something like that could disrupt the entire gameplay, because throwing something like that on a DM like me, now I have to sit there and in the moment you're forcing me to figure out what the mechanics mean for this. So I've let you create this great idea, but you're using my mechanics without my knowledge and without my approval. So you might have an idea of what this device would do. But when it comes down to it, if you throw that on me in the moment, not only is it disruptive of the entire gameplay, especially if we're in a group campaign, it would make me have to sit there and figure out what you've done. I'd have to sit there and ask you a bunch of questions. Well, how did you do it? What exactly was your intent? And then I have to figure out how it would work. Then I have to sit there again. It's one of those things where
It's
I
not
would
like
be
what I
I would
think.
be hesitant because it throws more
Something
work
with
on
you.
me in the moment. I'm interested in you guys catching me off guard, which you guys do a lot. You guys do things that I can't predict. You guys ask questions. You guys just do actions that I can't predict. But drawing the line of letting you guys take the mechanics of the realm into your own hands, and hoping that it makes perfect sense at the end. There's a lot of things that I think that you guys could do in certain situations. And yes, talking with me, we could probably work something out. But it would, by rule of thumb, I wouldn't allow it, right? Like if you came to me and said, hey bro, I have this really cool idea, I don't want to tell you all the details, but can I shop the idea enough with you? I'm down for veteran gamers coming up with creative ideas, but as a general rule of any player could do this, I would have to say no, mainly because there's an honor system that has to be adhered to, and it's mainly for the potential of the disruption of throwing something that I would have to then try to do in the moment, whereas I'm already probably trying to figure out like the encounter or the situation. Throwing that would just kind of throw a monkey wrench. So it's not like it would be undoable. I just think as a general rule, it's a little dangerous.
It definitely it's definitely not for, we'll say, the faint of heart, and it's definitely not for every situation either. Like
But
there's definitely
for
going
a
to be a
specific
lot of
situation, like if you were saying, hey, I want to set up an ambush, right? And blah blah blah, like you guys are going to set up an ambush for something in game. If you were to say, hey man, I'm going to set some stuff up. Now, obviously, normally you would just set the traps up and we would all know. So me as a DM, I would know when it gets triggered. But if you say you wanted to try to do something special, and you're like, hey, I just want to like put something like a tripwire somewhere, you know what I mean? And that's the other thing too, like thinking about the context of the situation. If we were going to do that, if you were setting up an ambush, but you wanted to set up the tripwires but not tell me where they are, even if I could trust that my players wouldn't just decide where they are, if we could set up a situation where you could write it out beforehand so you can't change your answer, in the end, again, and it all depends on player, DM, all of that. What benefit does it gain? Not even if it's simple, right? Like in that situation, I'm just gonna set up the tripwires and I'm just gonna do it like as the player, and I'll let you know when they trigger. It's one of those situations where does it
I
benefit
I
the
do see what you're
narration of the
saying. Like
game for me to have to wait
that
for
is
you?
hard.
And again,
That
and the thing that I see that you're trying to solve, it's not a problem that you're trying to solve, but I see the thing is the what it really comes down to, like I kept saying, is it's that honor system, right? It really depends on the gaming crew. And like my old DM, something like that would never fly in the old realm. But he was super super protective of his realm. Like he was so protective, like you weren't even allowed to use certain like terminology in other games, kind of protective, right? And so shit like that, he was so micromanaging in terms of he had to know everything. I'm a lot more open about that, especially when it comes to like you guys having your agendas and having things that you want to do. So, like I said, if you had an idea and you wanted to pitch it to me, I'd be more than willing to hear it out. And in most situations, I could see it working out. But the more complicated it gets, that's when it starts to get into am I willing to be that sidelined or that sideswiped by something that is going to cause me more work? Versus, is it also going to add to that gameplay, right? Because if you knowing it, then having to stop me and being like, oh, wait, but before you continue, this is now happening. Now I have to take the step back and go, oh, you're right. You know what I'm saying? So your example of the book, giving it to somebody and then letting me figure out like the outcome, that's a unique situation that, like you said, you can give someone a present and just walk away and be like, by the way, here's what I did to that book. That is a situation we might be able to work out, right? But if you were going to do it and say in the middle of a fight, that makes it a little harder.
And that's, I think more what I'm referring to is specifically like, hey, stuff that I feel like we've already established how this functions, how this works. It's just like, and it's likely something that I would have like already implemented.
I mean, similar to, I mean, we can consider it similar to your ring. You basically kind of did that to the ring where it's like you're just kind of, you set it up to where we both forget about it, but when you use it, neither of us really know what's going to happen, right? Like it's one of those situations where the longer you wait, the less we really know what can happen because I can't plan for every moment you're going to possibly use it. So,
right.
Like to answer your question, is it possible? Yes. As a rule of thumb, I would advise against it.
Yes,
and
I think,
without it being a veteran player, I would probably say no.
What you're talking about, I don't think I would go down that road. Like,
I don't think you would too. That's why I say I think we could easily come up with situations where that makes sense and it could be fun, and I think it could be entertaining. You just have to do it in a way that's not disruptive to the normal gameplay. Because, again, remember, it's not so much that the information is that I'm going to use it against you, but it's also because I'm narrating the story and narrating how the timeline of the game is going, not knowing information just makes me slower. So that's really the bigger issue.
I totally get that. I do.
But a good idea. I think it's something that's worth looking into and discussing, and I think it's something that's absolutely, if you could even decide a certain level of mechanic, like certain situations where like, hey, you have the ability to prepare one spell and instantly release it whenever you want. Here's a piece of paper. If you write it on this piece of paper and set it aside where we can all see it and it can't change, that's your free spell. You never have to tell anyone. Something like that kind of a mechanic would be a lot of fun because then you're like, hey, DM, I'm casting this spell, and then everyone gets to see what that magical spell is, right?
You activated my trap card.
Right? Like, let's say you get a gift from a god, and you're like, you can have, one cantrip. I'm going to bless you with a cantrip. You're like, can I not tell you what it is? Can I write it down on my character sheet and not tell you what it is until I'm ready to use it for the first time? Like, that would be amazing. You got this gift from a god, and it's one cantrip. So as long as you stick to the rules, you're like, I promise to just choose a cantrip that you said I can choose. I just don't want to tell you until I'm ready to use it. As long as we can justify the honesty, right? Where you could write it down and we could both basically know that it can't change. Hell yeah. That would be really, really fun. Because then I'm excited because I'm like, I gave you a cantrip. I don't need to know which one it is. It doesn't matter, right? But again, that is not disruptive for you to be like, I'm going to do a cantrip. You know which one it is? No, you don't. And then, like, those are the kind of situations I could see it working in. But the more complicated it gets, the more I hesitate.
No, I get you. Okay, bet. I am here for it. So, I feel like some of my other questions might go pretty hard into the weeds. You know what I mean? Like they might take us some time to get through.
I mean, isn't that what this is for?
I mean, yes, but I don't know how much time we have left.
I mean, honestly, it's Friday tomorrow. It's whatever. We got time. Since you're remoting, as soon as we're off, I'm done. So it's like I don't.
Let's do this. I got one more that I'm. See, I don't know if I should ask this one because I feel like I'm directly involved. But when you refer to the prophecy, you always call it the prophecy. And I'm curious if this prophecy is like a singular, like overall realm prophecy, or if there are, potentially like, oh, in this culture there's an orc prophecy, or over here is an elven prophecy, and like they have prophecies all over the place. Is this like the prophecy prime, or like? Yeah.
So no, it's actually a really good question. Because again, I've put a lot of thought into how I want to do the prophecy. So the prophecy is kind of all of it. So yes, you are right. There are cultural prophecies. There are, ancient tales and things like that you can come across, based on what races and clans you find. But typically, I try to be careful and I don't try to red herring a prophecy. So when I use that term, even if it is like, the old dwarven prophecy, if I'm using that word, it's usually because I'm trying to imply that even if it's dwarven specific to that clan, it's kind of like you carrying the one from your dad, or your dad carrying the one that you now know about, right? It's that idea of it may be specific to them and it may be working for them for something, but like you've seen, just because someone has it doesn't necessarily mean that it's meant for them. So that dwarven prophecy may have lasted centuries for these dwarves and this dwarven clan. But maybe the whole point was that dwarven clan was meant to keep this until someone finds them and hears it, right? And then maybe that's when that civilization collapses. They are no longer needed to hold the prophecy. So it's like the idea of, to answer your question more thoroughly too, both in-game and out of game, is it one prophecy or many? No one really knows. And what I mean by that is even Zenith isn't 100% sure. And I don't leave it vague for any other particular reason other than it's not meant to have an answer, because the way that I like to use the prophecy is the fact that each individual piece has a reason, but they all have a reason, right? Like you're
implying that they're all unified in some way, shape, or form, even if they all have different purposes.
Yeah, that's the idea. Like, so think about it. Your prophecy led you to the Blue Adept, and it led you to understand that there is a way to travel to that place. And it's waiting for somebody. Now, you don't know if that prophecy was meant for you to be here, so you could learn that you could also take that ride if you find the right person, or if that prophecy is meant to eventually get to that person to lead them here. Or what if the prophecy was meant to get you the knowledge so you lead the person here, right? The idea is that that part of the prophecy, no one really knows who it's for. It's going to do its job. But if you zoom out and look at all of the prophecies and all of the things that they do, it's eerily coincidental that all of these random things that people get and are told to go do, when you zoom way out, it's oddly coincidental that they all tend to lead to something, right? Like there's prophecy about, all of the different, like there's prophecies that indicate all of the ways that the Septim's Tear and the Heart Pendant, there's a bunch of prophecies around that about unlocking a door to a secret, like a jail or a secret vault, right? All of those prophecies basically talk about how it's going to be involved, but they're like kind of instructions, but they're also warning signs. So it's a warning also indicating instructions depending on how you read the prophecy and which part you have. So some people read a prophecy and they see a warning. They say, if you see these signs, this is happening. Now, it doesn't mean that you can force those signs, right? Like, oh, you may see an increase in activity of this type of animal. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean if you bring a bunch of those animals over here, it's going to cause it. But what if you bringing the animals over causes something that is unbeknownst to you? That would then cause the thing. So the prophecies are meant to be vague because sometimes they make themselves happen. Sometimes they force things to happen. Sometimes people go after them. Sometimes they're just coincidental, right? And the way I got this, right? So talking about more about the origin of High Point, talking about phase and proton from the Apprentice Adept series books, similar to how the Oracle and the prophecy works in that world, right? There was the prophecy and phase, and the Oracle, but it was the computer that was basically doing all of this, right? But those things existed before the computer and the thing had crossed. Like there's all those overlaps, right, of what existed first, chicken or the egg kind of concept, right? And the computer was basically doing the prophecy to eventually fix things. But each individual thing that it did with those prophecies, remember the actual prophecy in phase where you go and you ask a question? It isn't telling you what question to ask. But the prophecy it gave, the info it gave, led to something bigger, but also solved your problem. So how do you answer that question, right? When you go to an oracle and ask it a question, it gives you an answer. And it both solves your very, very specific one-time only question that only you can ask, and it can never predict what you're going to ask, and it can only give you one answer. But the answer it gives you not only directly relates to whatever you need, but it also relates to a bigger thing going on that every other thing it ever said also afflicts, right? So how do you answer that? Is it individual and just coincidentally all leads somewhere? Was it all pre-written? Is the prophecy just a giant poem that if you read it in its entirety describes the entire past, future, and history of everything? Or is it its own mantle? Is the prophecy its own aspect of how the universe writes itself, where there are things that it needs? Because remember, in my realm, I also have the concept of points that are in flux and times that are fixed. So what if the prophecy, kind of like, how people talk about if you go back in time and mess with something, there'll be an entity that comes in to fix it. Doctor Who has this, where you have like the dimensional beings that will come in and fix errors in time. Some people believe the prophecy is just that. It is the physical mending of the fact that free will exists, but the universe still must evolve sometimes in a certain way and sometimes freely. So I like the idea of the prophecy not having an answer, because I don't have an answer. I don't have one giant prophecy that I've pre-written that I constantly shoehorn in. It constantly grows and intertwines with itself when it needs to. And I have a bunch of them written out for certain things, but I also find new times when new prophecies matter. And it all, again, it's kind of like anything I do. It's all tied in to intrigue and to push the story forward, but it's also going to happen. It's also indicating things that are either in flux or fixed. And again, I'm using it to help me remember all of those little benchmarks, so whenever we get there, I have something kind of to kick off that memory. But yeah, that's a great question, and it's intentionally left vague. I intentionally don't have an answer because that's the mystery.
That is an answer. In fact, that's exactly what the question was, is how do you depict what this, like, is this just its own, or is it a culmination, or is it all of the above? Like, that is...
And again, I like it because I'm not... you know me, I hate the whole because I said so thing as a DM. Everything has an answer, but this is one of those times where it's appropriate to say that there isn't an answer. It's appropriate in my mind to say this is how it is, because it's the entity itself, like the concept of the prophecy itself isn't supposed to be understandable. That's why it's a prophecy. It's supposed to be it literally is the living essence of vagueness. And to say that they all absolutely connect. Yeah. So it's like to say that they all absolutely connect and they all have a purpose would indicate someone's pulling the string, someone's writing it. And it's not like I have a god like the god of fate writing these. This is the prophecy is something that even Zenith himself cannot overcome. It's in High Point. It was in his previous realm where there was prophecy like things happening. It's kind of like the Eternals. The idea is no matter what crystal sphere, what universe, what dimension you travel to, in our realm, we believe in prophecy. In many fictional realms, they believe in prophecy. It's an eternal concept that spreads across every fabric of every universe. And like it's also in phase. It's in phase. It's in proton. The anomaly that is in High Point, right? It's literally one of those things where I couldn't get away from it. It's a great thing to leverage and use. But to say, oh yeah, no, it's all connected, means that it's a giant plot point, means that it's a giant overarching campaign, and it's not. They're all individual pieces. They just also happen to be pieces of a giant thing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, like a lug nut on a car has a very specific purpose, but you wouldn't say the lug nut is a car, right? Yeah. It's part of a giant car. It has a very specific job, but is the lug nut for the wheel, or is the lug nut for the car? You know what I'm saying? Like, how far, when you talk about this prophecy, right? If the prophecy is the vehicle, but the prophecy is also the lug nut. So which is it? Is the lug nut a part of the car as a whole? But its very specific job is to keep that wheel on.
Me once, two things can be true at the same time.
Exactly. And this is why I like the idea of the answer is meant to be vague, because I don't want there to be an answer. I want it to literally live the way it lives in the realm, which is just like that for everybody. Nobody knows. And I like it like that. It's just something that lives. And even Zenith doesn't question it. Even Zenith goes, hey, he's even fought against it before. It's just one of those things, like, you accept it or you don't, but it's there whether or not you like it. And I like it just like that. I think out of all, because I don't have a lot of those, right? I don't have a lot of things that just are. But this is one of those rare times where I realize actually it makes it better that way. Because yes, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, because of the way I've just described it in the zoom out concept, yes, you could say that it is all one giant thing. But by saying one giant thing indicates that there's one thing it's leading to. But the only thing it's leading to is the future of High Point. Right? It's not like there's one giant prophecy leading to one action. And the prophecy has not always been leading to that same action. Every stage has it's like you see way back in the day, you had small little parts of the prophecy that led to something big. But that big thing was one of many small pieces of other prophecies that all led to something big, which were all, it's like a pyramid scheme. Each tiny little piece is in and of itself its own thing, but it kind of led to something else, which was in and of itself its own thing, of a many other set, which led to something, which of its own thing. And the end result isn't the top of the pyramid where there's one thing left to do. It's all leading to this one action. Once that happens, you're going to zoom out and see another set. The idea is it doesn't stop. The prophecy, and that's why I like it as this idea that that's why I implemented the idea that there's a myth for some people that believe the prophecy is the weave of existence. It's the, D&D had a name for it, metatext. I've actually, so there's a real concept. So it's called metatext in D&D. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the old school D&D, like before Forgotten Realms and everything, they came up with the idea of metatext to explain like the very fabric of all creation. Like if you could learn metatext, you could basically manipulate creation and reality itself. Metatext was literally the written aspect of everything, right? And if you kind of be lofty about it, I kind of imagine that the metatext was the books, because they always said if you could learn it, you could change it. And the metatext was the concept of the universe, right? So they made an in-game lore for the books, and even in that lore, it's designed that if you learn this, you get to change it. Remember, beyond the books, people. I love that, and so again, these are the things I love about D&D is they put in these layers for us to use. So it's kind of like metatext that I put in this belief that the prophecy is a representation of the metatext and how the metatext forces existence to continue, right? And some people believe that there's a mantle behind it. Some people believe there's a god behind it. But it's there, whether you choose to ignore it or whether you choose to believe it, whether you choose to hear it, whether you choose to follow it, it's there. And that's exactly how I've always wanted it to be, is there if you want it, but you can't get rid of it.
Right.
So hopefully that answers your question. Good one, though. Fantastic question. Fantastic. Wally says, everything is relative to an outcome of actions. Therefore, as long as you are performing actions, the end always evolves into something else. So the story continues to the next part. 100%. Exactly. You know what I mean? And again, the prophecy doesn't always come true. Doesn't always come true. And that's what's also fun, is not every prophecy is a guarantee of actions. Some of them can indicate a potential or a warning or
I mean, think about how a lot of prophecies are worded. It's like you got to do this to prevent this, or you got to do this to stop this. So it's like,
or if
is the
this is to
prophecy that it's gonna
happen.
come to true, or is the prophecy that it's not going to come true?
Exactly, and that's what.
Isn't one or
Thank
the
you.
other.
Thank you for bringing that up, because exactly, the prophecy is typically written in the sense of warnings or potentials, because it's never meant to say this will happen. It's always meant to say that these are things that are coming. And why would you be warned if you weren't supposed to change them? But again, sometimes maybe you're warned in order to make them happen. Right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly, and yeah.
like it's
And
that whole
it
thing of
depends on your
and
perspective.
how
Like, do
many
you
people
want
have
it to
questioned
happen?
in the realm. I like the fact that there are people that question whether or not the prophecies predict things or prophecies create. There's a big mind shift in High Point, depending on who you ask. Some people believe that the prophecy forces it, like the prophecy creates it, and or predicts it, like the prophecy says, "Hey, this is happening," and other people believe that because the prophecy exists, it will happen. Like basically, some people
Talk
say
about the
that.
Oracle and Phase, like you really look at what happened in that story. Almost everything was tracked back to the Oracle. Like if the
Yeah.
Oracle hadn't done what it did,
No.
there might not have ever been a need for what happened.
Exactly.
You know
No,
what I mean?
and that's and it's like you're saying, like now you see where I'm getting like all my influences from, because just like in the book series, exactly, is like the Blue Adept only got lasered in the knee because someone said he was a problem, but that was from the Oracle, right? So if that person had never gone to the Oracle and heard that, they never would have gone after him. He never would have ran. He never would have gone to the phase. He never would have learned magic. All of it literally happened because someone was afraid of him. And did the Oracle predict all of that, or did the Oracle force it, or did the Oracle make it happen, right? So it's that chicken and the egg. So some people like really want to know, like, what is it, right? Wally also says that there you have prophets of said prophecy changing the words to make it easy to pass along and it loses its meaning. So absolutely, depending on how you get the prophecy, who has it, who remembers it, will alter it over time, right? So you have a clan who has this ancient, historical prophecy of their race, but maybe they have a bastardized
Religious
version of it.
prophecies, that's huge.
Yeah, so no, it's one of those things. It's fun to play with. It is a headache a lot of the times, but it's one of those things that I feel, again, it's an enrichment. It's an enrichment and it's an aid to keep me on track.
So there's a couple more things I wanted to get at.
It ain't that late. Let's go. We at least got another half hour.
I'm trying to decide. This might take the rest of the half hour.
All right, well,
Is that
let me go
one
grab another
question
drink.
about
Let me go
half
grab
an hour?
another water. You sit there and maybe ask chat which question is next. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody in chat actually knows or watched the episode, the stream that is in question. But there was an aspect at the end where he was talking about the third war, right? And this third war, it was a lot more like the saints kind of turned into the mantles, kind of turned into the god, kind of turned into the pantheon, right? Well, after all that happened and they settled into their place, now we had to deal with all the magic that was going on down on Earth, and so all these mages and whatnot were acting crazy. So I want to know more about what these mages were really trying to accomplish. Was there organization in these mages? Was there like a group of them that got together like the Illuminati that were just like plotting behind the scenes to like hoard all the magic for themselves? Or was this just like a bunch of people, like a ragtag group of people got together and were like, you know what, we're gonna wreck this. So we'll yeah, you know what, I think we'll go that right. We'll go that route. That's what I ended up talking about. We'll go that route.
All right, hit me. What do we got?
So, going back to the wars, and let's talk about the last war, the third war.
Oh, the Third Great War, War of the Mages, or
Mages. So, a couple of things. So, there seems to be three relatively distinct fronts in this war. There is the front of the gods. There is the front of, say, everyone else, and the front of the mages. Now, the front of the mages inevitably is against both the gods and everyone else. But one of my first primary questions is, were all of these mages that were a part of this? Now, clearly not every mage is trying to do this, right? Mm-hmm. There are some mages, right? And so my thought process is, it's like, think about in today's day and age, right? Our mages are the capitalists, and we got the 1% of the 1%, right? You got like these top tier dogs that are like hoarding all the massive amounts of wealth, right? And that's such a small percentage of the actual people.
That's what they wanted. So that's essentially what they were going for.
That's kind of how I envision these mages, is like there is a small group of mages that got together and was like, you know what? We want to be powerful. We don't want anyone to fuck with our power. Mm-hmm. And so how do we go about doing that? We make sure that the other people that are like us, that could get some of this power and start doing the shit that we're doing, we got to make sure they don't have access to it. And then we got to make sure the people that granted us this power, that the people that gave us access to this power, don't fuck around and take it away from us.
Yep.
So we got to protect ourselves from like all sides, so that we are gods, right? We're the ones that can't be stopped, can't be questioned, can't be whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Was this like... And I guess I don't know, because like even when I think about it in relationship to like that analogy of like capitalists versus mages, right? Not every capitalist is on the same page, right? Not every 1%er. Like, granted, they all have the same idea, but like think about alignments. Like, you know, somebody who's what is it, lawful evil? They're just really selfish. They really want things for themselves. They want to build themselves up. Like, I don't care about the other 1%ers necessarily.
Right.
Only to the point that they can help me maintain my power.
Exactly.
So was this like legit, like just some Illuminati group that had been meeting and they'd just been chit-chatting with each other and were like, you know what, guys? I'm tired of other people being able to have... Or was this something that was plotting over a long period of time? Are there different factions that like came together and met and like made something? Or was there like a turning point? Like, I guess I'm just...
No. So all great questions. So it's a little bit of a mix, and again, looking at the references that I've used, because kind of going back to the Apprentice Adept series, where how FaZe has magic, people can kind of use magic. Some people are just inept at, or just have just innate powers. But then you have those that hold like true power, but there's limitations and things like that. So when I was going through building out High Point and I was making all these changes, you know, I was trying to keep a hold of the fact that these things happened, right? I'm not just scrapping it from the start. So we go back to the very first war, where I let a bunch of things just roam free and use power openly. And I felt like if I'm not just going to retcon all of this, not everything could be covered up. So the idea is that obviously, you know, a lot of stuff got created, a lot of power got thrown around, and not all of that could be, you know, always around. So some things were round up, some things were gotten rid of, powers moved around, items destroyed, things like that. Damn, I want that fucking sweatshirt. I haven't bought it yet, but I really want that sweatshirt.
Oh, my lady got this for me for my birthday.
I'm
It
jealous.
was the great. It was so good.
You have to tell me where she got it because I really fucking want that shirt. Like as soon as I
I'll
saw
look
that
it up.
movie,
I
I
think
legit was like, I'm buying that sweatshirt.
straight up.
I just don't
I
know which
seriously
I just
think
don't know which one I want because I want a good quality one.
right. She actually went to the Mattel website. Just so
Okay,
you know,
that's what
for
I
my
need to do.
dad's.
I just need to go to them and just get the official one because what I want to do for the party is I want to wear that, but I was thinking about doing like his cowboy outfit underneath. So if it gets too hot, take that off and then
Ooh.
just have like.
Facts.
Anyway,
Legitness.
so yeah, so as I'm going through the story, I'm realizing that they rounded up some people, they rounded up some magical items, they rounded up things that were overpowered, redistributed the power, but not everything got rounded up, right? Some things got hidden, some things got lost, some things got
This is the
stolen.
gods doing this?
Gods, mortals, immortals. Just back in the very first war, there was a lot of like cleanup being done, but not everything got cleaned
Right.
up, right? Because again, I didn't retcon everything. I didn't just like start from scratch, but I wanted to keep it aflow. And then, of course, you had the War of the Fallen, which is now the gods are at war with each other. And, of course, what are they doing? But, I mean, now you're trying to basically have usurpers. So you had the original war, which was trying to even out the balance of power usage. And then you had this uprising and this mutiny. So, of course, that's one of the first things they wanted to do is they brought out the big guns, right? So a bunch of people called in favors. They brought out of their special vaults that were, hidden. So basically a bunch of powerful things and weapons and entities that hadn't been seen since the first times, the first iteration, got re-released, right? They were brought out. And more stuff got created this time, right? They broke the Geneva Convention, in a sense, and started making new nuclear weapons, right? Because that's the idea, right? There was an arms race in the very, very beginning. Not so much an arms race, but people were just creating
Yeah.
shit, and they were like, hey, what else can I make?
Yeah.
And then there was hey, everyone needs to chill. And then it was a all-out world war of the gods. So now all of a sudden the arms race started up again, but with limitations, right? There's now limitations in place, but now people have to get creative, right? Before people were just, blinking shit into existence without thought. Now you had to be creative because you had limitations, right? There were guidelines set in place. There were rules. There were things you couldn't just do anymore, right? So all of these things kept getting created, but again, there were things from the very original times. There were now new things being created. Those things got brought back out, and then there was another purge of that. Right as the war died down, those things once again, they got purged, redistributed, lost, stolen, hidden. Once again, so now you have two generations of these things, right, of varying power levels, and then you come now to a time frame when you have the gods finally all in their rightful places. And they're trying now to run a world that's never had rules. So imagine, I created High Point all those times ago, but it was never just a god's world, right? It was supposed to be the idea of a fully fledged world, just like it is now. It's a full realm, just like it is now, but it was unmanaged. So now imagine eons of evolving creatures, all of these mortals, all of these different races, all of these things that are always been in existence, saw the blink of the universe and all of the overpoweredness, and suddenly had that wash of lack of power happen. And then all of a sudden things started to balance out, and there's still remnants of these power, and then out of nowhere there's some disruption. And now all of these very powerful entities start to creep in and start to make rules and start to bend the way the universe works. And, you're not talking about like, people on different planets learning of different things, but, think about how religion takes over culture here and how different people react to it. So when the gods finally took their place after the War of the Fallen and they started getting into their jobs and basically, doing what they were supposed to do, starting to take over their spheres of influence, they had to start taking over the existing mortals as well as creating new ones. So you have to influence mortals to want to follow you. You have to creep into their dreams. You have to shift their perception of reality. You have to, when someone needs something to rain, if they need it for their crops, how else do you get them to pay attention to you than send them a sign of you that gets their attention and then give them the thing they ask for, right? So you have these things that are starting to happen all over High Point. And it's causing a disruption because you've had these mortals in an ever-shifting world, and suddenly now there's management. Things aren't happening the way they used to. There are now rules. There was one opportunity where I was able to do this, and now a god comes in and says, oh, mortals now have to pray to me in order to get this. I mean, imagine why druids are so pissed off at most religions. There was once upon a time where basically all magic was considered druid magic because it was just accessible. Now all of a sudden you have gods coming in saying you can't do that because you don't pray to me. And a god can literally come in and just shut down access to stuff because that's their sphere of influence. You're telling me that me, a nomad on some random planet who, used to be able to spark up fires, now I don't have access because the god of thunder and lightning came in and said, fuck you, pray to me or you don't get to do sparkly shit anymore? That fucked with a lot of people. It literally was like new management coming into a company, firing half the people and then saying you're changing your job, even though things were just fine. Right? And that's kind of what happened. So you had this new era of management coming in. And remember, when these management came in, they tried to also take away a bunch of magic, right? There were mortals who got their hands on mantles, who got their hands on powerful magical items that were god tier. You had basically mortals handling god tier magic because it was made during a time where it wasn't considered a problem, right? Like nowadays, you don't have a god tier item able to be wielded by a mortal. There's limitations. There's literally, you can't wield this, right? There's atonement, or you have to tune this to certain things. Those are the rules that were set in place after all the Great Wars, right? But imagine that there were items created, kind of like your ring, the new version of the ring that Dov carries, wouldn't be able to do what you do. You have a broken one. You have a prototype, which means that you have one that doesn't have those limitations, right? Same idea, but imagine if that were a god-created weapon, but didn't have the limitations that stopped you from using it. So you had mages coming in that had these items. You had mages that had assumed mantles of power because they had nowhere else to go because of all the disruption, right? You had mantles of power that needed willing and able people, but those that would be willing and able otherwise are fighting. And that mantle doesn't belong up, in that mess, right? So you have basically a bunch of different types of mortals who have varying amounts of power, and then you have people coming in trying to take it away, limit it, restrict it, and that's just not going to be kosher. I mean, you had entire cultures of magic suddenly without magic because you had dick-ass gods come in and say, no, I just don't want you to have magic. And then that's where you have a lot of these, this is how I kind of explain a lot of the reasons why certain races hate certain gods and why certain gods have certain beefs. It's because when they came in and tried to uproot all this, some gods made pacts and made deals with mortals to kind of help the transition and even it out. Some gods said, hey, pray to me and I'll let you keep all your shit. And those are, different types. And it kind of seeded the world. But at one point, there were several groups who wanted to fight back. There was an Illuminati-ish group who was secretly trying to spread their influence, and they were part of the reason why a lot of those factions did come together, whether those factions knew that's why they wanted to get into the fight. But essentially what it was is part and partial. It wasn't, don't think of it as one giant effort, because obviously we're talking about the entire realm here, but it was an era. It did accumulate to one giant battle, or one war, but it was an era of upheaval where enough of those people who were feeling put out and still had access to their magic pushed back against the gods and said no. And that's where it really came down to the gods having to put their foot down and establish themselves, because that was the ruling. Zenith was like, we have to be better, we have to be organized, and these are your jobs. And so the gods had to come in, but there was pushback. And that pushback finally led to an all-out war between mortals and gods. And it was the War of the Mages, because it was basically mages didn't want to give up and they didn't want to succeed to the gods and have the gods control magic. They believed it was a mortal matter. They believed that mortal magic was a mortal matter and should never have been in the hands of gods to decide. And that's what was happening, is for the first time ever, these mortals were basically being told a god is going to decide the use of magic. And that was not okay. So the War of Magic wasn't so much an evil plot to be the only holders of magic. It was kind of like telling a druid, this is no longer your forest. It's not so much the druid thinks that you're evil and they want to take over every forest in the universe. It's that you try to come in and say, hey, you can live here. You can be all friends with the animals, but you're paying taxes and you can't access the east side. Tell that to... Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you. But yeah, so if that makes a little bit... still muted.
I totally
There you are.
did not even realize that happened. That's
But yeah,
so crazy.
so if that makes a little bit more sense of, again, like the whole war of the mages was basically, yes, a lot of them, there were evil ones that were trying to accumulate it all for themselves, but it was also from the point of view of, this is not your realm, this is not your space. We don't, like, there was gods always, but the idea that gods had their realm and we had ours, so there was a separation. Now gods were coming in and making mortal rules, and they didn't like that.
Because all this was happening, despite the fact that there might have been beef between certain higher level entities, right? Like, because, as you said before, at the end of the Second Great War, there was a lot of issues up in the Pantheon that everyone was homies with each other, but they realized that their job was to maintain order first, and then they could go fuck with their buddies if they needed to.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Like, keep that, and so this is a big part of that. And so the gods in this war were technically on the same side.
Not necessarily, though, because some gods agreed with the mortals and some gods didn't. So you still had your job to do as your god. You still had your area of influence, but what side you chose to be on... Like, so there were some gods who wanted the mortals to maintain control of the mortal magic. There were some gods who said that isn't our job. So they were on the side of mortals who fought for the mortals to maintain power.
Is there a separation between mortal magic and divine magic?
Absolutely.
And so it's not like magic is magic and then you just get to a certain level that makes it divine. It's like, oh no, this is...
It's an access thing. So it's like, you can consider it all the weave, but it's that access level, right? So how you interact with it and what you can do with it is just like how a druid can do something different than a sorcerer, that can do something different than a mage. So, a god is just a completely different level of access.
But what you're saying is, so were the mages trying to cut off every other mortal's access?
Some of them were. So yes, a big drive during this war was that so there was the mortals versus the gods, in terms of the mortals didn't think the gods had any right to inflict their control over the mortals' use of magic. But in that, of course, you have that internal fight of, well, once we win our right to magic, in that entire argument, then there's the mindset of, well, then who should get magic, right? So it was gods don't deserve to tell us what to do with magic, but then there are the people of, well, not everyone needs magic, right? And then, of course, that idea gets brought out of a couple things. It gets brought out of greed. It gets brought out of, ultimate power corrupts ultimately, or absolute power corrupts absolutely. But you also, wait, hang on. But you also have the motivator that it's going to take a lot of power to fight the gods. The less people using the power, the less it's spread out. Therefore, the more concentrated their effort against the gods could be. So there wasn't always a negative reason. Sometimes people try to use benevolent reasons of why cutting people off was a good thing. But eventually it came down to the perception of there were large enough groups who were actively trying to basically... The idea was stop the gods from taking over, make it a mortal matter, but also... we get to decide from here on out. So imagine, again, also kind of like the U.S. becoming a country, right? It was not only get rid of the tyranny, but it was also, now it's become now that we got rid of the tyranny, how do we make sure that we stay in control? So it was both sides.
Conceptually, how like, I guess, what was the mindset? Like, how were they planning on approaching? Because...
what was their goal and how they were going to shut off magic to mortals?
Like logistically, like, how do you stop somebody from using magic unless magic stops existing?
So there's two ways. There's two ways.
Okay.
Well, three ways, technically. If you are a god, a powerful enough god, or you're a god with a particular sphere of influence, you have access. So the god of thunder and lightning can technically shut off certain types of magic to people. Now, if you're strong enough, and depending on how you tap into that magic, there's a lot of conditions. But if you're a god, if you're powerful enough, or like if you're powerful enough over your adversary, you can just shut them off from the use of the weave. It's kind of like, it's a power range, right? If like a level 1 spellcaster goes against a god, the god can basically just cut you off from your magic. Like, but once you reach a certain level, your connection is more intertwined with your soul. It's like you are actually connected to it. So that's why being a higher power mage is very important, because it actually means that you are more entwined with the weave, which means it's harder to separate you, which means it would take a god directly over the influence of that magic, or a very like a zenith level god to even get close to
20th level is close to godhood, right?
Yeah, so 20th level, like it would take a lot.
Could theoretically a 20th level magic practitioner cut off a level 1 magic practitioner from their magic? So
this is where we get into the other ways that they were planning on this. So gods and gods of certain influence can cut off magic. You can also cut off magic. The long route was deny information, deny knowledge. If you control the knowledge of how to use magic, no one can use magic. So that was their main plan. Their main plan was, once they took control over the gods, they would control knowledge. And once they could control knowledge over time, they could weed out anybody who still uses magic.
So they literally wanted to control the gods?
No, they wanted gods to not interfere with their use. So basically, kind of like how some states don't want the feds to give them laws. They say, no, that's our problem. Yeah. That's what the mortals were doing. Gods were coming in and saying, hey, certain people can use certain types of magic. Like druids use this magic, and sorcerers, like they were trying to divide it up. And mortals were like, we got this, thanks. You don't need to tell us who can use it when.
Is this when the implementations of the different classes of magic were starting to get separated? Like, before this war, magic was kind of just magic, and then afterwards, like, oh, now you have mages, now you have wizards, now you have warlocks, now you have
magic was, in a way, magic was magic, but everyone tapped into it the same way. Like, there were still druids, but the idea wasn't, you are a druid, I am a bard. The idea is, it wasn't a concept that you tapped in through magic, you tapped in through talking to a tree, and I tapped in through music. It was, you just felt how you touched magic, and magic just worked. And it wasn't as different. Like, a bard and a druid could eventually have a conversation and get to this, be able to do the same thing. Whereas nowadays, druid has druid magic, and a bard can, like, a druid doesn't give inspiration, but a bard does, right? Back in the day, a druid could learn how to give inspiration. A bard could teach any magic user how to do that. It was, again, overpowered, and there wasn't any rules. There was loose. So it wasn't so much that there weren't classes. Again, it was the way I used to play. People would be like, I want to be a druid, but I also want to be able to, like, give inspiration. And I'd be like, cool, let's make it happen. There was no rules. There was no guide. It wasn't that they didn't exist. Right. It wasn't that that the rules weren't there. It was just nobody was there. And that's how I explained, again, my level of DMing through my storyline. And then Cosmic says, so what's my favorite school of magic in 5e? Divination, necromancy, conjuration, evocation. Ooh. Give me a second. I have to look up the whole list. It's been a while since I've actually thought about that. Actually, I might have to pause on that. We might have to come back to that on Monday, because that's a loaded question. Because it's not just I got to go through what kind of spells are in each one. Because, if you really, okay, honestly, I don't know if this is in 5e, but if I had to pick a favorite school, psionics, hands down psionics. If psionics is a school in 5e, which I think it still is, hands down, psionics is the best magic class. Just fun as hell to play, super creative.
Psionic, but I don't know if it's classified as magic. I think it might be classified kind of closer towards key is in, like, the monks and stuff like that, where it's like magical effects but not actively magic.
I'm gonna
when
have to get
I
back to you on
think
that, Cosmic.
about
I'm gonna have to
when I
look
think
up some of
about
those spells more.
when I think about the different schools of magic, I basically think of what are the subclasses of wizard, because subclasses of
Right.
wizard have every school of magic, but then they have some other things. You know, they got blade singing, they got blade song or whatever. I see a new one in here called blood magic. I don't know what that is, but I might have to look at that.
I don't know.
But
I
there are
mean,
two new
like
ones.
straight up
Right.
necromancy, conjuration, and evocation are like strong top three. I mean, though. I mean, those
Yeah,
are like the primary class. The primary schools anyway. But still, like, you know,
but there
as a
are
favorite,
two. There are two that came out kind of recently that I am kind of a huge fan of, especially just not necessarily because of the spells that are in them, but because of the premise of them and what you could do with them. And that's the Chronergy and Graviturgy schools of magic. And one is the study of, affecting time,
yeah.
and the other is the study of affecting gravity, right?
If we're just going for the
And
old school though, if we're like going for like the main top classes though, like if I'm really breaking it down, conjuration is cool, but it's also just it's creating stuff. And it was like when you really think about doing magic, creating stuff like is probably one of the most practical uses, like in the real world. Like again, here in the real world, I'd probably take conjuration because it's the most practical, it's the most useful, and it would do me the most good here. Necromancy is a fun concept, but it's also just very specific to a path of life, pun intended. It's a type of lifestyle, no pun intended. But
I
I
really
would
think
say evocation as a magic user in game is probably the best and probably the strongest. Enchantment's good. Enchantment's not bad.
if we're talking about real life, real world, and we're only talking about the old school original ones, um, I would probably in the real world use transmutation.
Ooh,
I think
transmutation's a good one
that
too.
would do some very creative, very interesting things. Again, without like the rules of like just what spells can do in D&D, but like just the idea of what transmutation is. I really love a lot of the creativity that you can come up with, a lot of the ways you can use it, a lot of the ways you can play with the world around you using transmutation. But if we're talking about like what you were saying, like what would be the most fun, I honestly, just personally think I would enjoy illusion magic the most.
Illusion magic can be
Just
fun too. It can be entertaining to do
like
that, especially when you pull it off right.
so much like and I think of like how much shit I could get away with, how much stuff I could do, where I could go, who I could be, like like you want to talk about being able to like get to the top, like you could do so much
This is why I
stuff.
say second
Although
edition psionics though. If you look at second edition
enchantment
psionics, that right there,
is a close second to illusion when trying to get what you
because
want
you can
out in
basically
the
do almost all other types of magic, but never be seen doing it. You
exactly.
could basically just be sitting there and no one knows it's
Which
you.
is lightweight, why I think it's slightly different than magic, because like you're not casting anything, there's no spells, there's
It just
nothing,
it depends on
just
how you
shit.
do it. But yeah, wanted to before we go here. So I wanted to go back. So yeah, so going back to your other question about
Oh, yeah.
like the mages versus yeah. So again, it's that whole thing of the lore is built off of different myths and legends. So and again, I don't write things out like a campaign. So it's like when we're talking about what was the main driver, there was no like one reason for that war. It was that essence of it was the time and era where I had to fix, from the top down, right? So I'd fixed all of my Pantheon. I fixed how I wanted to start DMing. And in order to explain how that looked when I finally started making, the places that you guys game in, and I started making all of the cultures, how would they have been affected by all of this, right? And it's also a unique way of describing why there's so many different cultures, different paths, different legends and stories, and why you can run into, legends of like great mages that seem to defy all types of magic that are not seen now, right? Because things were different back then, and they came from an era where it could have happened. But when it comes down to it, from a god point of view, it was a bunch of rebellious mortals who basically kind of like from the gods' point of view, the mortals were acting like the South in the Civil War. From the mages' point of view, they were the U.S. seceding from from Europe
Yeah.
and the king, right? They were basically trying to say, you don't get to tell us how to run this. This is our world, and you live over there. And then from the non-mages, the lesser mages, it's more like capitalism. A bunch of one percenters want to control everything. And then within the mages, same thing. There's some that wanted to be the one percenters, some that wanted to be, just wanted to fight for the right for everybody, right? So there's a lot of different levels of it, but it really does come down to the two major groups. One was fighting for the gods to back off. One was fighting to control all magic at the mortal level. And then you have the side ones, which were against both of those, right? The people who thought the gods were right. Some people thought the gods were wrong. Some people thought there should be one percenters, and some people thought there shouldn't be. But the two main groups that you normally hear of are the ones that fought against the gods for control of magic, and the ones that fought against the mortals for control of magic. There were others, but those are the two that typically get talked about because those were the driving forces that got us here today, right? Those were the reasons why things didn't turn out differently. If there wasn't a group of mages to fight against the gods, there would have been a lot less magic available, and there would have been a lot more rules. And if there weren't gods trying to fight for all of the power, we'd have a different type of distribution. Or if there weren't people who stopped them, there'd be a different distribution. So those are the two main points I talk about, and you'll hear in Realm about the Third Main War, because those are the most prevalent. But that doesn't necessarily mean, like when you talk about again, using a real life history, when you talk about the history of the stock market, you typically talk about the major things, right? You talk about the big crashes. You don't really talk about the bubble parts, right? You don't talk about the spikes. It's because those aren't the ones that set the stage for the future, right? Small spikes don't set the stage for the future, but the lessons you learn from the big crashes. So you may hear that it's all Illuminati, evil, all mages are bad, only that, but in the reality is more complicated. But let's face it, that's not as fun. What's fun is that a bunch of mages were just trying to hoard all the magic for themselves against gods and mortals. And that's the story that gets people excited. And then you get to learn the perspective from different NPCs and different gods. And then you piece the story together, realizing, oh, there's just a lot more shit going on. And then Cosmic has some stuff real quick. So Cosmic says the spell that he wants to work on is based on Magic Missile. Oh yeah, so he does want to base the Magic Missile, the low damage missile, but it's meant for its informational aspect with knowing which elemental damage type to types, and creates its immunity to resist or absorb. Gets healed or is weak to. Interesting. So okay, so it's like Magic Missile. It's less powerful, but it has elemental aspects. That's fascinating. I want to hear. If you can give us a full write up in Discord, I will definitely review that on Monday.
Yeah, that actually sounds pretty interesting.
Vicious mockery in the form of puns.
Yeah, I asked him what his favorite enchantment spell was, and he said vicious mockery in the form of puns, which is absolutely fire.
I like it.
I want to make a bard who is a dad, and the only
just
thing
dad
he
jokes
does is just tell dad jokes all freaking day long.
That's
he's
funny.
Gonna use vicious mockery all the time, and he's just gonna say your mom, and it's gonna be great.
Man, you know how great is making a bard that's a comedian and then having like an encounter in a bar during one of his shows. So while the people are having a bar fight in the back, he's just sitting there vicious mockering them.
That's what you get, hecklers. I want to psychic damage you to death.
So did you have any more questions on the origins? Was that the last one, or did you have more?
I have more. I got like 5 or 6 more, but
I mean, do you want to do some rapid fire, or do we want to save this so we can dig more in? I mean, it depends. I mean, it depends on the audience, and it depends on you, because you're benefiting from this in a different way than the audience is. But
I feel like it'd be better to do it on a diving day.
I mean, if you want to, if you can come back next Thursday, we can do another deep dive, and then we can can continue this, because I got the information. The information never goes away.
I mean, that's facts. No, I'm excited. I think we got a lot of goodness out of this. I think a lot of my other questions aren't Like they're about stuff like the phlogiston and the world tree and
Ah,
the crystal spheres and stuff like that. Also, I wanted to let you know that I was browsing around the internet today and I was able to procure a couple of old books. They're PDFs,
ooh,
but they're old books. Let me see. The first
very
one
nice,
is
very nice.
the first one's literally called Crystal Spheres.
Oh, yep, good book. That's one of the
And
first ones that they actually wrote. I think it's either a
you have
module.
that one already?
I don't have it, no, but it's a good module
Okay.
that basically is, I think, the origin story. Like
Is it
that's
a
the one where
module?
they. What's up?
Is it a module?
I think so. I think back in the day, those were really usually written as modules, but basically that's where you would have gotten all of the lore originally from the crystal spheres. Like that's where that was the
Okay,
first book
that's
written
what I
about
was
them.
hoping.
Yeah, that's
That's
where
what
you're
I
gonna
was
find. I
hoping.
think that's a Forgotten Realms book.
It's actually Spelljammer. I don't know
Oh,
if that's
Spelljammer. Yeah,
Forgotten
yeah,
Realms.
Spelljammer. So yeah, because
Um,
Spelljammer is essentially that's how you can travel between the crystal spheres and go to different ones. So yeah, the Spelljammer series is where they made the ships that could travel between crystal spheres. So they travel through the phlogiston. So that book will also tell you a lot about the phlogiston as well and how it
okay.
reacts.
And then the other book that I found was called Wild Space, also a
Ooh,
Spelljammer book.
Wild Space. Now, Wild Space is interesting. Um, yeah, no, that's a good book. Yeah, those are going to be some good reads. We could actually do that on one
So
of the streams. We could actually like do like
go through
a
some of the stuff.
review and read them up. That's good.
I think
Good finds.
that'd be kind of cool. So yeah, because I was as I was listening to you go through some of like a lot of like the lore stuff, and oh, that was the other question I was gonna ask you, and maybe we can answer that like super duper quick. If you could just give me the list, like a rough list of the people that might have been in the little in between place with you with Mistara and Mistra
Oh, you want like all of
and
the names of all of like
I mean
the
not
players
all, but
involved?
like just like an idea of like the types of people because like okay when you think about Marvel and you're like hey who was there the day they stopped Thanos?
Right,
Oh, the Hulk
right.
was there. Thor was there. Zenith was there. Mistara was there.
Gotcha.
Like you know, like who are the players? Because like it was you and some other gods that were out here that were going out and sending your avatars into these breaches and to get shredded up to stop these cracks from uh going out like. I mean, there was you, there was Mistara, but like, you might not even have all of this like
No, no,
concrete yet. It might
I
just be
can
like a
pull that. I don't
mishmash.
have it with me, but I can absolutely generate that list because that would be actually a lot of fun. Because then also next week when we do the deep dive for your other questions, we can actually go into why I chose those people. What their purpose was. Like we could actually go into a lot of like the old D&D lore about that, and just kind of just because again, I'm using the story to also just um, pay homage to D&D as a whole, right? So it's not just that
For
I just
sure.
want a game that's not D&D. I'm looking at it as a because again when I stopped playing with my old gaming group and I wanted to start DMing for myself because I wanted to start playing D&D again. I started just doing deep dives. I started just reading so much about D&D that I never knew because I learned so much from my DM because he had so much good knowledge and he had so many references and resources that I could learn a lot from him, especially about how it used to be. But when I stopped playing with them, I had to learn it on my own. So a lot of the story that I developed and the reason why the reason why I want to talk about the NPCs and the gods that I ran into at that time, the reason why I used them is because again, a lot of this, the reason why I even used the Cataclysm as my reasoning for escape is because I learned about it, right? I was trying to learn about the entire lore and what Wizards of the Coast and what Gygax and all of his buddies originally wrote for this. And as I'm going through and I'm learning about all of these things, it's starting to trigger the idea of this adventure that Zenith is going on, and it's pulling in all of these things from the real D&D world, right? Like the overall universe of D&D, which is basically again a bunch of floating crystal spheres and phlogiston endlessly. And if you bring all of that together, I wanted to I wanted to represent all of that because, I don't want to run a game in Tamriel, right? I don't want to run a game in Greyhawk. I wanted to run my own game, but I also didn't want to act like these things never happened. I didn't want to not be able to reference someone like Mystara because she's so, important, right? But how do you do that and at the same time justify why she's not here? Or how do you play Mystara in this world that when someone else plays her, right? So I wanted those layers of understanding
somewhere else.
so to have an opportunity to have met all of them and to have experienced the time before all of this myself by researching it and to have Zenith have involved in that, I can now have High Point make all of those references because he was there. It was something that he brought from an outside, universe kind of. And it all does exist. Those people still exist. I may have met them during the rift, right? In a temporal, situation. But I still have my memories, which means they still all have theirs. Which means Mistral knows she met people from the future that don't exist yet, right? She's back in her time frame with knowledge of Zenith. What are the implications of that? Right? Like, that was the fun part is, this is why I want to go through and I will write out all the NPCs because the idea that I wanted to plant those seeds of like fun, right? Of when you think about the overall story and then you kind of add like little like things like this, kind of again, how like Doctor Who did, when you can have modern Doctor Who episodes reference ways that they interacted with old doctors, and how it makes sense is because the doctor's smart enough to know how not to metagame. He knows when not to use future knowledge, and he knows when to use it. And it makes sense because he is good at just like acting like he doesn't know any better. And that's kind of, I like that idea of all of these situations overlapping. And so if you were to leave High Point, if you could find out a way to leave High Point, you could go find, like, I could game that, and then you could go find Mystara. Or because these things exist, maybe I get to a point to where, let's say we go through the prophecy, you guys game so much that we get through all of like the big cool stuff. I now have a reason that I could pull some really fun, known NPCs into High Point. Because, like, again, just sometime in the future, all of a sudden one of those NPCs that I found finds a way into High Point and is like, yo, like, we got a problem. Like, and then my players could like be part of that like gaming session as gods, right? Maybe they have to go and leave High Point and we go to Greyhawk because there's a problem over there. And then we actually go, like, the implication was to allow those seeds that it wasn't just some world I created, but I wanted it to be a part of something bigger, and I wanted that something bigger to be the greater world of Dungeons and Dragons and all of the things that it has done. Because again, I'm a firm believer that each edition isn't its own game. I don't necessarily, I love what my DM did about making editions over time. Like, literally the timeline follows the edition, so the further you go back, you actually transition through editions. I'm on the more of the mindset that all of the editions are one giant game. They're patches, but that doesn't mean that but unlike a video game where a patch replaces something, it's more like DLC. I look at it as I can play a game and I can choose to play, or like, okay, even better, the Final Fantasy remake. If you played it, you can play the new version of the game, which is all real time, right? It's all real time. It's all live action fighting. But if you're keen for the old game, you can switch to turn-based. You can switch to the old school combat where you're get a moment to select your thing. You have the choice in a modern game to do that. That is how I feel D&D has always been. Each book, each edition that comes out was meant to help correct, alter, and advance the story up until this point and add more, but I never looked at them as replacements. You know what I mean?
Right.
I never looked at second edition was meant to stop you from using anything from first and say first. It's not a patch to a game where, hey, what you knew is gone. That weapon doesn't work like that anymore. That your life doesn't work like that anymore. That's not how it was meant to be. It was more of a, we think we found a way that you might like this to do this better, so here's another option. Hey, we've improved it yet again. Here's another option, slight tweak. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to. Now, granted, changing it does make some difficulties because each edition was designed with all of those rules in mind together. But that's where the creative idea of being able to pull from different editions, I think is really like unique. Like for me, one of the things that I like to do, is some of my most powerful spells that you can learn are actually just old versions of spells. Like Magic Missile has, I think, what is it, a limit of 5 now? I think you can only get like 5 or 6.
Really, you can only upcast it so far?
Yeah, I think with Magic Missile you can only get so many, but compared to the original one, or maybe that was an older version, but there was one where it actually capped you at how many you could get. But the original one never really had a cap. So technically, depending on how powerful you are, you could just sit there and stack up 30 magic missiles.
Magic missiles.
And so I like the idea of, instead of saying, oh, what does the current book say about Magic Missile? Why don't I just say, hey, this is how we're playing it. This is the edition I use. This is the rule set I use. But if you get powerful enough, maybe there's a different type of version of it, right? And just like with what Cosmic was saying about his, like altering it to be with some elemental damage, that's something I allow in my game, right? You can learn the spell Magic Missile, but that's just the one that, was created and that can be replicated. But that doesn't mean it's the most powerful version of it, because the one that can be replicated is probably not necessarily the weakest, but remember, it's the one that can be replicated.
It's the most generic.
It's the most generic. It's the one that anybody can do. And that's the one thing that I always keep in mind, especially when I didn't really explain this well when I did my magic classes. But that's one of the reasons why I also like the way that I split my magic classes, is because I tried to break away from the idea that I wanted people to be more creative with magic, because that is the exact mindset I have. If someone can make a scroll, that means that spell is generic. It means it can be reproduced. It means that anybody with the ability to read that, it's like a recipe. The most generic recipes are the ones that get put in books, are the ones that go out all the time. It's the ones that everybody knows, right? The most generic recipe goes on a box, like mac and cheese. Boil water, throw it all together, stir. It's a generic recipe, but you want to make baked mac and cheese with 5 different types of cheese and make your pasta fresh. There's multiple recipes for that, right? But the best way to have it is someone who learned it the hard way, like, your mom. Like, someone who grew up learning how to make it from scratch. That's the one that has the best, right? It's not the one that you can buy in the box. It's the one that took time. And so having those options where I take an older spell and make that attainable as just a higher class version also shows people that spells don't have to work as they're available. They're available because they work. And that does mean that you should be able to take magic. And again, another reason why I built my realm the way I did around magic. Magic is meant to be a representation of the person, right? It's a manifestation. So why is all magic identical? I don't like that. I don't like the idea that all magic that fit the idea that you could take 100 mages, have them all cast fireball, and you get the identical fireball every time. That to me would be more like, that should be a show off move from a top tier mage academy. They should be able to take 100 mages and cast 100 identical fireballs all at once as a show of, this is how good we are. I don't think that should be the standard, right? I think if you take 100 mages and have them all cast fireball, I think the idea that they should be all slightly different. Maybe one's slightly smaller, maybe one's bigger, maybe one's more violent, maybe one's more spherical, maybe one's more like a Hadouken, maybe one does slightly more damage, maybe one doesn't explode
with a shockwave.
Exactly. Like, I like this idea that magic is the representation of the person, and it should be used that way. And every, I like the idea of spells because it gives you that foundation. But again, you don't have to make your own. You don't have to homebrew it. But everyone should be able to. I think magic should be able to be made your own, and that's why I wanted to create my own classes. That, again, like the sorcerer, like the wizard, like the warlock. I wanted people to be able to make it more than just about what what they can read.
Talking about a lot of these different magic classes, I actually honestly purposely intentionally shied away from certain types of magic classes just because it's not that it wouldn't be enjoyable, but I feel like there's a lot of extra work involved to play those classes.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just be like, "Oh, I want to be a magic, or I want to use magic, so hey, I cast this thing." It's like, especially as a sorcerer, like you gotta like take and craft anything you want to cast.
Right.
You gotta be prepared and like.
But the
and so,
difference
like,
is in a pinch, you can also prepare and craft anything that you could come up with, right? So,
and so
that's
I
the
have
balance,
this
right? You can't
idea
be
for a sorcerer that is. It's I want to play it so bad, and I think I only have one second edition character in your realm. The only other characters I have in your realm are in the Discord, and those are like
technically fifth
alternate
edition.
features.
Yeah, that's true. I think Dobbed is technically the only second
it's-
edition character.
Like this, I think I have an idea for a second edition character that I want to create as a sorcerer, and it's a bum, or at least somebody who's perceived as a bum. They roll around, they live in the streets, they are so.
But they use the scrap and the junk
gross.
of everybody else to
Like,
basically.
They use none of like they use what's on them. They pick out their own hair. They dig in their earwax. They get a tear from themselves. They pull out a hair. They clip their fingernail.
Hey,
They
I like that. That's dope.
everything that's like on them, and it's like, okay, you get arrested and you get thrown in a jail cell. Well, guess what? I got everything I need right here. You're gonna give me a bath before you put me in here? Like, just
No, that's
stuff like that. Like,
that's such a good idea. That's such a good idea. That's so good.
I would love to try and play around with a character. I think that would be a good time.
I think so too. All right, well, cool. So next, let me make this note here in Discord. So next time we do this, I need to, what are you? I need to. Okay, I need to list all the NPCs for the Cataclysm repair. So I will do that by the next stream, or by next Thursday. I think Cosmic might have an item, or at least this spell for us by Monday. If not, I think you still have a couple items that we could go over, or we can do another high-low, because we haven't done a high-low in a minute. I think we haven't done races yet.
What was the thing that I said that I wanted to talk about? There was something that I said at the end of last time when we were talking about those other spells. It wasn't my samurai class. Oh, it was a subclass. It was a druid subclass that I made.
So if you want to bring that, we can see what Cosmic has. We can go over that, and then we'll probably figure out another topic for that way.
Okay.
I'll figure out another main talking point.
I will do my best to be available. I might have to. I might still have to go to the group that I normally go to on Wednesdays. Thursdays.
I don't mind changing, because I've been considering swapping to Thursday. So if we want to change next Thursday to a different day, I would be available Tuesday night.
Tuesday. I might be able to do Tuesday.
So maybe we'll do an update in the Discord, so everybody knows. But let's tentatively, as of right now, let's do Monday and Tuesday D&D discussions. So we'll have you in the or we'll have you in the studio on Monday. We'll do our normal homebrew review, and then the next day you can either be live or remote like this, and then we'll do more of a deep dive with the origins and go over more of your questions, and then I'll have those NPCs written out.
Okay.
All right, excellent. Well, that was actually, that was a lot of fun. I'm super excited for part 3 happening next Tuesday, as far as we know. Thank you guys for being in chat. Cosmic, thank you for joining us. I know Wally's not here anymore, but it was great to see him in chat. And Life of Dice, thank you again for the follow. Appreciate you if you're still here.
Yeah.
If you like what you saw here today and missed anything, or if you want to catch anything else that we've done in the past, any of our other streams, you can catch us on YouTube at MisfitGamersStudios. It's there right below Kage's face. And you can catch all of our previous streams, as well as all of my pop-up live stream gameplays that I do on the weekends. You can catch us for D&D discussions typically Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, but next week's going to be special. schedule. We're going to do it Monday and Tuesday, Pacific Standard Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And on weekends, I will just do random pop-up games. But if you want, you can join our Discord and get those updates and come chat with us. You can give us ideas for topics you want to hear us talk about. You can ask us questions and have us answer them on stream, or just ask us questions and that we can answer in the Discord. It's a great time. We're trying to build the community, so it's pretty small now, but we do want to see you guys there. So we'll throw that in the Discord, or if you can throw that in chat real quick. And then otherwise, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And I will see you on Thursday. Or no, it is Thursday, right? Oh man, it's been a week.
I know, it's weird having
It's been
me
a
here on
week.
a Thursday. Throwing you off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you being here on Thursday. Well, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I am looking forward to this weekend. I will be playing more of my pop-up games, so I do want to continue my Cyberpunk run-through. I might play some more Baldur's Gate. I want to see if Lucifer will be available for any kind of evil playthrough this weekend. But I might do my nice playthrough, and then I'm also going to play some more DBD because I was having a lot of fun as Killer, and I was doing pretty good.
Very cool.
So join me this weekend for that. Hit us up on Monday and Tuesday for D&D discussions. Otherwise, that's us, and we are going to take off. Hope you have a good rest of your night. Thank you guys for joining us.
This is my friends.